All right, people, let's go. I'm back. Took a bit of a break, did a couple videos, but I guess a break for me is a couple videos instead of 10 of them. All right, Joe, you're in for 1,000 land salute, super critical for 500. Let's see who's number 3, and we will get started. So today, we're just going to get right into it. I am going to be continuing the quest to review every single video on moral realism and debunk all of them with facts and logic. You just crush them all. Nitty, what's up? You get 250. All right. So what we're going to do today is cover some videos from Christian Gonzalez. Now, Christian and I had some exchanges some time back that I thought went pretty well. And then more recently, he blocked me over on Substack after an exchange. I don't know what exactly the reasoning was, but he's subsequently made some critical remarks about me. So I've been a little reluctant to review his content, largely because I expect to get blocked on TikTok too. But we'll see. Christian, you are welcome to talk to me. I don't have anything against you personally. I disagree with your work on metaethics. I haven't really appreciated that exchange that we had. I didn't think that was very pleasant. But I've gotten over worse interactions with people before, so I'd be happy to talk to you. So let's get into the videos. And so there's a whole bunch of these. And hopefully, I've only listened to 2 or 3 of these. I haven't even listened to this first one. So you know what? Let's just go. And we'll see what I have to say about this.
Important moral philosopher of the last 100 years is probably someone you haven't heard of. His name was Derek Parfit. And he wrote a book that got decently popular in the 80s, which is called Reasons and Persons. And it argued that essentially who you are is a matter of degree. So it's very Buddhist. In fact, it was so Buddhist that it was found out that in Buddhist temples, various Buddhist monks were found chanting lines from his book. But I don't want to talk to you about that because later on, he spent essentially 2 decades arguing that first, objective moral truths exist, and second, that the best moral theory that describes what you should do is this grand unified theory of morality. This convergence between consequentialism, Kantian deontology, and contractualism. And he does it over the span of 2,000 pages, which not many people have actually read, but you're in luck because I have. But I'm not going to go into detail about the specific arguments because that's probably better suited for like a lecture series. But what I do want to do is I want to read the last page of the book because I think it's pretty interesting. I regret that in a book called On What Matters, I have said so little about what matters. I've been trying to defend the belief that some things really do matter. I hope to say more about what matters in what would be my volume 4. He died before he could write it. One thing that greatly matters is the failure of we rich people to prevent, as we so easily could, much of the suffering and many of the early deaths of the poorest people in the world. If we believe that, in our treatment of these poorest people, we are not acting wrongly, we are like those who believed that they were justified in having slaves. Some of us ask how much of our wealth we rich people ought to give to these poorest people. But that question wrongly assumes that our wealth is ours to give. The wealth is legally ours, but these poorest people have much stronger moral claims to some of this wealth. We ought to transfer to these people, in the ways I mentioned in a footnote, at least 10% of what we inherit or earn. What now matters most is how we respond to various risks for the survival of humanity. If we reduce these risks and humanity survives the next few centuries, our descendants or successors could end these risks by spreading through the galaxy. Life can be wonderful as well as terrible, and we shall increasingly have the power to make life good. Since human history may only just be beginning, we can expect that future humans or suprahumans may achieve some great goods that we cannot now even imagine. In Nietzsche's words, there has never been such a new dawn and clear horizon and such an open sea. If we are the only rational beings in the universe, as some recent evidence suggests, it matters even more whether we shall have descendants or successors during the billions of years in which that would be possible. Some of our successors might live lives and create worlds that, though failing to justify past suffering, would have given us all, including those who suffered most, reasons to be glad that the universe exists.
All right. I expected metaethics, and we didn't really get that there. He mentioned it briefly. I don't really disagree with any of the last part of that. It sounds like Parfit was very explicitly advocating for the kinds of attitudes and sentiments that have motivated the effective altruist movement. Some reference to stuff like existential risk and long-termism, to the giving pledge, giving 10% of your income to charity. I'm in favor of all of that. He's also probably not wrong that I don't know exactly what he said about Parfit being. Let's see. He said something about
the last 100 years is probably someone you haven't heard of. His name was Derek Parfit.
One of the most influential, one of the most important. That might be true. One of the most important moral philosophers. I will say though, I do think Derek Parfit is wildly overrated. Although he wrote a lot, his arguments are bad. for moral realism. They're not very good. If anybody thinks he's got a good argument, you're always welcome to get in touch with me, present one of his arguments. I've discussed pretty much every argument that I've seen from him at some point, somewhere or other. At some point, they're all just going to appeal rather boldly to some sort of intuition that I don't share and that others don't share. And so I think Parfit relied on your sort of standard weak analytic intuition mongering methodology. It doesn't really get you anywhere. I don't share his intuitions. I don't share his intuitions about the Repugnant conclusion. I don't find him a very compelling writer. I don't think he's particularly good at arguing for his position. Seems like a great guy, but very, very overrated in terms of the quality of his arguments. So not much more I could say besides that. Again, nothing against Parfit personally. I just think he's overrated and isn't particularly persuasive. All right, let's move on to what hopefully will be actual metaethics.
O'Connor seems to think so.
But most people...
All right.
Is all of morality just an expression of emotion? Alex O'Connor seems to think so.
But most people want to say that incest is wrong. Why? Well, we just think it's disgusting. It's like that's all you've got ultimately when you break it down. But I think that's just what's going on across the board. It's got this emotional component, but I think there is just the emotional component. I think that's what this ethics is.
So Alex is arguing for emotivism. This is a theory that says all moral claims are not facts. They're actually just expressions of emotions. So when you say murder is wrong, what you're really saying is boo murder, that there's no fact of the matter. Now, this is subtle. He's not saying that murder is wrong is false. What he's saying is that we don't even talk as if it was a fact, that it's purely an expression of emotion.
Emotivism, it's a theory about ethics, but really it's a theory about language.
So since it's a theory about language, we have to ask ourselves, is this actually how we talk? And the answer is no. Here's 3 examples.
Yeah, this is going to be a problem. Christian says the answer is no. Let's predict in advance. Well, first of all, people in chat, you know what I'm going to say about the question of whether or not when people make moral claims, they're expressing emotions and making non-propositional claims. They're not also making propositional claims. Whether or not that's how people speak is an empirical question. I don't know if it's Ellie or Eli, but Eli, yeah, that's another one. Who's we? I think he's referring to people in general without really being very specific. So whatever. But if that's who he's referring to, how people happen to speak is an empirical question. And I'm going to predict in advance that he's not going to present any empirical data for this claim.
First of all, in practice, we'll often say things like, no, it's definitely true that eating meat is wrong. So if you translated that to emotivist language, it wouldn't make sense anymore. It's definitely true.
Yeah, so no emotive. Well, I mean, maybe the crudest emotivist in the world wouldn't acknowledge that people appear, at least superficially or explicitly, to speak of moral claims being true. So expressivists handle this perfectly fine. They have deflationary views of truth. Contemporary expressivism doesn't really struggle to accommodate this truth-like talk. I mean, from the very outset, no one has been unaware that moral claims are, declarative sentences. So when a person says stealing is wrong, that's just structurally, it's like apples are red or apples are fruits. So even the grammatical structure of moral claims appears declaratively like it's alluding to propositional claims. The thing is, though, that what matters in practice is for expressivists or non-cognitivists in this case, and cognitivists alike, what the primary or central function of the language is in everyday contexts. So what matters is whether or not, just because the moral claims could be used in some propositional way, doesn't mean that that's their primary or central function. Typically throughout the 20th century, proponents of both expressivist or cognitivist and non-cognitivist views would point towards certain aspects of language that were more consistent with their approaches. And then they would acknowledge that they were parts of the language that or features of the way that the language worked that appeared inconsistent. And then they try to accommodate or account for that. Now, Christian here is proposing that people will say, no, that's definitely true. Well, no, in response to what? Like he's not giving us enough context here. Now, if someone said something like moral claims are not actually true or false, and someone said, no, they're definitely true, those people are already talking about metaethics. How often is that a part of everyday speech? I don't know, because that's an empirical question, but it's probably not that often. We don't really know. So let's see exactly what he said.
No. Here's 3 examples. first of all, in practice, will often say things like, no, it's definitely true that eating meat is wrong. So if you
Okay, so how often do people say that? No, it's definitely true that X is wrong. How often do they say that? I don't know the answer. Christian doesn't know the answer. And also, which languages are we talking about? There are over 7,000 languages in the world. Do they all assert moral claims in propositional terms? Or are they all in declarative? Sorry, I mean in declarative sentences. Even if it was true that in an analysis of English, the moral claims are typically expressed in declarative terms, it does not mean that this is true in every other language. It's not even necessarily the case that every language has cognate terms that neatly map on to English's moral language at all. So there is empirical research. There's cross-cultural psychological research that looks at whether, for instance, the Mongolian language actually has a proper cognate term. This does not mean that the language lacks normative discourse, but it does mean that certain terms don't translate well into other languages. And, Mongolian is not exactly the most obscure language in the world. New Guinea has what, like a huge percentage. I don't know if it's like a third of the world's languages. It's got a ridiculous number. There's like 1,000 or more languages in New Guinea. Very little is known about many of these languages. So extrapolating about how humans think and how humans speak on the basis of specifically how contemporary English speakers think is bizarre. Look, would you go to an English pub, look at the food being served at that pub, and then conclude this is what human beings eat? No, for the obvious reason that people in Thailand and Myanmar and Australia, oh, pretty similar there, or indigenous societies living in the Himalayas or living in South America, that they eat the same exact food as what you'd find in a British pub? Absolutely not. Of course not. You find diversity of food all over the world. You find diversity of thought all over the world as well. And there is a wealth of cross-cultural psychological research showing this. Surprisingly, though, there's not that much cross-cultural psychological research. So if you look back, and I've mentioned this many times, to this paper back from 2010 by Henrik Heine and Noren Zion called The Weirdest People in the World, what they show is that the vast majority of the participants in studies are from Western populations. Specifically, they introduced this acronym WEIRD. Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic populations are the primary participants in psychological research, and the people conducting studies are almost exclusively from or operating within weird cultures. So you have people with cultural biases studying other people with cultural biases. Now, when they went out and they looked at and they canvassed psychological research across a host of different characteristics, there are a few things that turn out to be fairly universal. These are often basic features of perception and that sort of thing. But when it comes to morality, and they actually specifically looked at morality, you had significant cross-cultural variation. Now, there's a little bit of cross-cultural research on whether or not people endorse relativism or different sorts of metaethical views around the world. There's an unpublished paper by Thomas Polzler that shows considerable cross-cultural variation, but it also shows very high levels of people endorsing anti-realist positions across cultures, or at least choosing the anti-realist response. Whether or not the measures are valid is a separate question. You have a paper by Sarkisian et al. Called Folk Moral Relativism. They looked at, where did they test people? I think it was China or Hong Kong. And they found significant high rates of relativist responses in that population as well as the United States. And then you have Beebe and Sakris have a cross-cultural paper where they looked at people in the United States, Poland, Ecuador, and China. And once again, high levels of anti-realism in all of those societies. That does not mean that people chose the non-cognitivist or emotivist response most frequently. That in some cases this wasn't offered, and in other cases they just didn't choose it. So you do have one paper by Taylor Davis, I think it's called Beyond Objectivism. And that's the only paper I know of where a majority of response, it's not a majority, the most common response, the modal response was a non-cognitivist response. You also have another paper by Beebe where he was one of the first to note and introduce the lack of these emotivist or non-cognitivist response options in metaethics research. And there, for at least some of the items, I think there's 7 or 8 items, about half of them, or maybe a little less than, it was like 3 out of 7 or something like that. The modal response, once again, the most common response was a non-cognitivist or emotivist response. So there is a mixed empirical literature. I think that there are significant validity issues with these studies. But the bottom line is what we do not have is really compelling empirical evidence that people tend to disfavor or not use moral language in a way that best comports with emotivism. I don't endorse emotivism as a metaethical position. I also don't think most people speak, think, or act like emotivists. I don't think that that's the case. But the bottom line is, if you wanted to answer that question, you would need to do cross-cultural and cross-linguistic empirical research. That research has barely been done, but what has been done does not weigh heavily against emotivism. It's not anywhere near sufficient to rule it out or falsify it. Because this is an empirical question. The scientific data is barely scratching the surface. It's insufficient to override it. What Christian is doing here, at least with this first example, is appealing to an armchair case. We don't know the frequency of this. We don't know which language this occurs in. We don't know how central this sort of context is. It sounds like he's referencing an alleged instance of where people supposedly engage in what sounds like metaethical talk, not everyday normative talk. And that might be appealing to metalinguistic or metatheoretic or folk theoretic conceptions of morality, where people are talking about what they take themselves to be doing rather than engaging in the sort of first order moral practices. Now, once you start looking at folk theoretic data, what you're not doing then is like looking at everyday human behavior. You're looking at everyday theories that humans have about their own behavior. And those are often very fraught. People don't have a good understanding of what they're doing when they engage in these sorts of things. Folk psychology is frequently just misguided. Folk assumptions about what they take themselves to be doing are not a good indicator of how they're thinking about these things or how they're speaking about these things. Now, that might sound ironic, given that I'm saying these are empirical questions. You need to look at how people are thinking about them. But when I say that, what I'm not saying is that you go around and go, hi, with a microphone, are you an emotivist? And then people go, oh, yes, I am. No. And nor am I saying you go around and ask people, hey, here's emotivism. Do you think that's right or wrong? Like, is that correct? And people go, yeah. And you go, okay, so they're emotivists. You shouldn't trust what people say about these matters. We need more implicit measures. We need more bottom-up measures that focus more on trying to elicit or gather data about everyday moral speech and practice that actually looks at everyday moral speech and practice, not that looks at what people say about their practices, because it's not a particularly reliable indicator of what they think. So what Christian is providing here is an armchair example. It's hypothetical. He's not referencing any actual person saying any actual thing in any actual context. This would be a bit like if I said, hey, let's talk about tiger behavior. And I said, imagine there was a tiger and I jumped into a cage with it and I ran up to the tiger and I went, you big stupid cat. It would attack me. Well, yeah, it might attack me. Would a tiger in fact attack me in the context? I'm guessing yes, but I don't know. It might be that a tiger would be confused or maybe it would only attack if it's hungry. Maybe it depends on the context that you're in. I don't know. Now, tigers, I think, actually are pretty aggressive. But would a lion necessarily attack you, or a bear? I don't know the frequency of that. That's an empirical question. You could say, oh, but bears are dangerous. Of course it would attack you if it felt threatened. Probably. It's the sort of thing where you can sit there and think about what you think would happen, but the best way to find out would be to test it. Now, maybe you need like a bear suit and see what would happen or something like that. I don't want people getting hurt. Don't go try to punch a bear. Don't do anything stupid or dangerous, please, on my account. My point is that, like, if you actually wanted to study animal aggression, you need to get actual instances of the animal and study what they do. So just so, if you want to see how people actually speak, ordinary people out there, you need to go find those people and find instances of them speaking and record it, observe it. That's how you study human behavior. You don't study it by thinking about it. That's a ridiculous way of studying the topic. I don't understand why philosophers and people doing what Christian is doing rely on these hypothetical examples. Go study actual human thought and behavior. And if you're thinking, well, Lance, why don't you practice what you preach? I do. I've done dozens of studies on this sort of thing. Run studies. That's how you find out how people speak and think. Jesus, this shouldn't be that complicated.
Translated that to emotivist language, it wouldn't make sense anymore. It's definitely true that boo eating meat is just not a coherent sentence.
Yeah, so this is terrible even on its own terms. Emotivists are not going to have a huge problem with people saying, like, does he think that Alex would deny that anybody ever says something it's true, that something is wrong? So, this is why people have deflationary conceptions of truth, or they'll interpret that language as being non-literal. It's also an open question how often people would say their moral claims are true. It's an open question what they mean by that. So there have been 2 or 3 studies on whether or not non-philosophers endorse the correspondence theory of truth, which would be pretty important for establishing some of the metaethical claims, or at least it's not like if they don't, it's like totally dispositive and it ruins any case for cognitivism or moral realism, or at least folk moral realism or folk cognitivism. But the issue there would just be that a lot of philosophers are operating implicitly in the assumption that the way that non-philosophers think about truth more or less fits with correspondence theory. The actual attempts to study this have been largely inconclusive, and have found some negative evidence for this. Now, does that mean I think that we should lean towards people not endorsing the correspondence theory? Not on the basis of that evidence, but I don't think that there's good theoretical motivation for supposing that they do in the first place. So the mere fact that people are saying that something is true doesn't necessarily mean that they think that it's true in the way that a philosopher that's a cognitivist about moral claims would say that they're true. Furthermore, if someone is going to criticize Alex, I would criticize Alex for endorsing emotivism without elaborating on some of the sort of contemporary updates. Now, I don't endorse all of those contemporary updates, but there have been, and there were in the past and remain today, more sophisticated and nuanced ways of characterizing and cashing out how non-philosophers think among emotivists and non-cognitivists, and these days the term really is expressivism, more generally than either Alex seems to be making explicit. I don't know if he's aware of it or not and is simplifying for his audiences, or that Christian is acknowledging here. There are conceptual resources readily available to expressivists to defend their views. There's a reason why these views persist to this day. If they could get taken out by really simple armchair observations by what Christian is offering, the views wouldn't have persisted until today.
Second, we'll often talk about moral claims as if they are something we could know, which would imply a truth value. For instance, you'll say, no, she definitely knows that stealing is wrong. You can't know something that's boo, that doesn't make sense, that's incoherent. Third, we'll often have disagreements and arguments about moral topics as if there was.
Yeah, so the thing about knowing, how often do people say that people know? I don't know. Does that mean that those people couldn't be emotivists, or there wouldn't be a way for an emotivist to capture what that means? I don't see why. So an emotivist might say, look, if you say she knows that it's wrong, that could also be understood in a way where you're saying something like, look, she appreciates or recognizes the appropriate emotional response to that, or something like that. The non-cognitivist or emotivist, I'm sorry, I'm throwing all these terms around. So non-cognitivism was the old school term for the position that moral claims are not propositional. Emotivism is a specific form of non-cognitivism, which says that moral claims are not propositional and instead express emotive content like boo or hurrah, approval, disapproval, but don't have any propositional content. This is to be distinguished from other types of non-cognitivist views, the most prominent being something like prescriptivism or universal prescriptivism. A very crude version would be that moral claims are imperatives. So murder is wrong would mean something like don't murder. But it could mean something like don't murder, nobody should murder, or something like that. So those would be some of those early theories. And then over the decades, this eventually evolved into contemporary expressivism, which started bringing in gizmos and gadgets to address the objections raised by like these sort of concerns that Christian is raising here. And they do an okay job of addressing those. So this is at a very low level of a superficial, like surface level of these disputes. And it's not very interesting because there's so much more to say on these matters. And I understand some degree of simplification may be necessary for like a TikTok audience, but what he's raising here is not particularly compelling.
There's a truth of the matter that someone could be right or wrong about. When one person says abortion is permissible and the other person says abortion is wrong, they're not just stating, I like vanilla and I like chocolate. They're arguing as if someone could be wrong in that situation.
Yeah, so this is the weakest of the three arguments. So there's already research showing, this is Kurthy and some others, that shows that the way that ordinary people conceive of disagreement is they're not, at least in English-speaking respondents in the studies, so who knows how well this generalizes. Let me take a step back. Okay, so now philosophers often characterize disagreement as two people holding contrary beliefs about propositional claims. So a disagreement would just be a case in which Alex holds that P and Sam holds that not P. So disagreement by definition would be conflicting beliefs about the truth of a propositional claim, something like that. Now, this is not the only way to construe disagreement. Suppose that you are arguing with a car salesman and you want to pay $5,000 for the car and they want you to pay $7,000 for the car. Do you have to think that there is some specific fact of the matter that stands independently true about the proper price of the car? No. So you don't have to be a realist about it. But when you're having that sort of disagreement, you may have a conflict where the facts are not in dispute. You just want different things. And so there can be disagreements about what's true. There can also be disagreements about what to do. So there could be, you could call them coordinative or goal-directed disputes. So these are conflicts where the facts are not in dispute. It's really a matter of negotiating what outcome to reach. I'll give another example I frequently give. You and a group of friends want to order some pizza. One friend's a vegan. They don't want cheese. One friend hates mushrooms. One person's obsessed with mushrooms. And so you negotiate. Okay, well, let's get one vegan pizza with mushrooms, and then we'll get the non-vegan pizza with pepperoni or whatever. And then everybody will have approximately equal number of slices of pizza, and we're all satisfied. Now, does there have to be a fact of the matter about the correct pizza slices, like what pizza toppings to get? No. And do people have to disagree? Is in virtue of those people arguing about what kind of pizza to get, do they have to disagree about what's true? No. It's just a matter of converging on, what it is that they want. Another case would be this person mugging you. They want your wallet. You don't want to give them your wallet. You disagree about what to do. You don't have to disagree about the facts. You disagree about what should happen in the scenario. So there is a little bit of empirical research showing that, in fact, let me see if I can pull up the paper and I'll read the abstract to you. Here it is. It's a paper called It's Common Sense. You Don't Need to Believe to Disagree by Kurthy, Bex Priestley, and Schemmer. And this was published in, where's the date? 2023. So it's a pretty recent paper. So here's the abstract. It is often assumed that disagreement only occurs when there's a clash, e.g. an inconsistency between beliefs. In the philosophical literature, this narrow view has sometimes been considered the obvious, intuitively correct view. In this paper, we argue that it should not be. We have conducted 2 pre-registered studies gauging English speakers' intuitions about whether there is a disagreement in a case where parties have non-clashing beliefs and clashing intentions. Our results suggest that common intuitions tell against the default view. Ordinary speakers describe clashes of intentions as disagreements, suggesting that the ordinary concept of disagreement is wide and that it extends beyond beliefs. Now, I could say I rest my case. I hope to see future evidence further expanding on it and vindicating this. But the bottom line is people can argue. Now, take 2 people clashing over the case of abortion. There's abortion protesters outside a clinic, and a person's trying to help someone go in to get an abortion, and they get into an argument. Now, could it be the case that they're disagreeing about what's true, whether abortion is morally right or wrong in some objective sense or something, or even a constructivist sense? Yes, of course. But it could also be some people don't want them to get abortions. Some people do want them to be able to get abortions. They disagree about what the outcome ought to be. They have a disagreement in what they want the future of the world to be like, what they want people to do, what they want people's goals and intentions are. Now, ask abortion protesters, look, is it important to you? Which one of these 2 outcomes would you rather have? You get to push a button, you get one of these 2 outcomes. All people that disagree with you about abortion being wrong now agree with you that abortion is wrong, but they still get abortions anyway. They just feel guilty about it and they consider it wrong. So they still get the abortions. They just agree that it's wrong. Or they still continue to disagree that it's wrong. They don't think it's wrong, but they don't get the abortions. Which do you think that the anti-abortion people would favor? That exactly the same amount of abortions occur, but people agree that abortion is wrong, or no abortions occur, but they still disagree? In fact, let me put this in to chat and ask you what you think. We're going to do this poll. So again, the question is, what do people that are anti-abortion, people that say abortion is wrong, which would they prefer? No abortions, but people still believe it's not wrong, or would they prefer that everybody believes it's wrong but get the same amount of abortions? Let me put this in the polls. All right. Start a poll. What would pro-life people prefer? Everyone agrees abortion. Everyone is pro-life, same amount, same abortion. Great. It's character limiting me. Why did they do that? Okay, now I've got that poll. Now, I'm going to predict that most of you will agree with me that people that are pro-life would prefer that there be no abortions that people are unable to get them or just are not motivated to get them, even if they disagree with them. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that the beliefs play second fiddle to what people want the world to be like, right? So imagine you could have everybody believe torture is wrong, but that they torture people all day. Or you could have them be very pro-torture, but they just never torture anybody. Which outcome would you prefer? Because I'm going to take the second one. So what people want to have happen is more important to them, morally speaking, than what people's beliefs are. There's no particular necessity for people to be arguing about what's true or false, when what really is centrally a priority for people is what the world is like, what people do. So again, there are disagreements about what's true. There's disagreements about what to do. The empirical research shows that, again, I have empirical data on my side. Does Christian present any studies? No. Look at what Lance does. Look at what Lance does. Lance remembers a study. He finds the study. He reads the abstract to the study. And I'm going to give you a link to the study too. I support what I'm saying with actual empirical data, unlike other people who just don't do this. Now, the place I got that is from some sketchy website. So let me find a better link to give you that's not sketchy. There. It might be behind a paywall, but I want to give you the official location of that paper. So I support what I'm saying with empirical data. Christian, why don't you give that a try? Sorry to be a little tough on people, but I mean, come on. We're talking about empirical stuff. Get empirical data. So what I'm proposing is that we don't really need to think of disagreements in terms of them requiring people to be having belief disputes. They could readily be cashed out in emotivist terms. Does this mean that they are? No. But it's just not the case that the fact that people argue or disagree with one another is good evidence that those people must be, or in fact are, cognitivists about moral language. Just doesn't follow. We can account for it on emotivist or at least non-cognitivist grounds or expressivist grounds or whatever. So, you know, in all of these cases, their critics present what strike me as superficial arguments. Notice that Christian doesn't explore the nuances and details like I have. Sorry, Christian, I'm exploring it more deeply than you are. Yeah, you're making TikToks. Fine. Then go on YouTube and make a longer video and spend more time. This stuff requires more detail, then give it more detail. Give it the detail it needs. But the point is here that there are responses that emotivists can give. They're not even that difficult to give. I'm not even an emotivist, and I'm doing this live without preparation. Okay. And I'm still able to immediately give an emotivist response and immediately draw on studies that raise strong considerations contrary to what Christian has proposed. Imagine I had a month to prepare. Imagine I was a dedicated emotivist that wanted to sit down and write a paper on this. You don't think I could come up with good reasons to account for what he's proposing? Oh, it looks like people disagree. Also, do you think AJ Ayer and RM Hare were such freaking idiots that it never occurred to them? Oh, people disagree about stuff. Why don't we actually go back and read what they say about these sorts of things? Because their own views were not as crude as the standard presentation of them is. And they were far more cognizant of the sorts of issues that Christian is raising. These issues were raised and addressed almost 100 years ago. This is not that difficult to deal with. Okay. And this is also relying on the assumption that we're still stuck with some really crude version of old school emotivism. We're not even dealing with contemporary expressivism. So no, these are not good objections. Man, we've only got through what, 2 videos? That's okay. Let's see what else we got.
But also just in practice, you don't always have emotions present when you make moral claims. Like you.
That one I agree with. Now, the thing is though, simply because you don't always have emotions present when you make moral claims, I wouldn't take that to mean that therefore they have to be propositional. It could be that you don't have a strong affective response, but that you've internalized attitudes that are grounded or rooted in emotional reactions, even if the reaction, you know, largely fades from having a strong or conscious affective component. So, you know, if someone mentions incest to me, I do moral philosophy. I've been doing it for what, 20 something years. I've heard incest cases so many times. I'm numb to going like, ugh. Now, if you present incest cases to freshmen in college, you'll often get uncomfortable squirming and some chuckling or giggling or something like that. People will be a little uncomfortable. They sometimes find it a little amusing, a little uncomfortable, a little gross. But if you ask them, would it be okay to like for siblings to make out? You might get like, no. But you ask me, I'm going to go, yeah, I'm I'm not a big fan of that. Right. But I'm not going like, blah, blah. You know, I'm not having a, you know, a strong affective response. Does that mean that if you ask me and I say, yeah, I'm not a big fan of incest either, that it's not ultimately rooted in emotion? No. So I don't take it that emotivists require one to have a strong affective component, only that those claims ultimately are internalized expressions of attitudinal stances that one holds. It doesn't, you know, the fact that you don't have an occurrent strong affective conscious sentiment or something accompanying the statement doesn't thereby make it a propositional claim.
You can say the Holocaust was wrong and not actually have a swelling of emotion when you say that, nor do you have to have it in any instance of when you say it. So clearly,
so he said you don't have to have any emotion when you say it. How does he know that? That's an empirical question. So have we done research to show something like that parts of the brain associated with emotion are not present or not activated when people make moral judgments or make moral claims? That's an empirical claim. So it's not always obvious when people are making moral claims the extent to which there is or could be activation of emotional parts of the brain. It could be that the emotional activation is suppressed, or it's not obvious, or it's not expressed. Not every expression or association with morality is conveyed through visible body language or visible expression. So, you know, it could be that whenever people make moral claims, there's, you know, their heart rate increases, or there's other sorts like skin conductance measures. You would have to do the empirical research. In fact, I do believe there is some empirical research on this. Give me one moment and I will try to find it. Yes. Okay. Here's a paper by Jordan Thoreau, Adam Waits, Larissa Heifetz, and Leanne Young. And I'm just going to read the abstract. And I don't remember what's on this. I read it probably 4 or 5 years ago. Okay. Metaethical judgments refer to judgments about the information expressed by moral claims. Moral objectivists generally believe that moral claims are akin to facts, whereas moral subjectivists generally believe that moral claims are akin to preferences. Evidence from developmental and social psychology is generally favored an objectivist view. I've critiqued this before. I don't think that that's true. However, this work has typically relied on few examples, and analyses have disallowed statistical generalizations beyond these stimuli. The present work addresses whether morals are represented as fact-like or preference-like using behavioral and neuroimaging methods in combination with statistical techniques. I'm going to skip ahead. Behaviorally, and contrary to prior work, morals were perceived as more preference-like than fact-like. Neurally, morals and preferences elicited common magnitudes and spatial patterns of activity, particularly within the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, or the DMPFC, a critical region for social cognition. The common DMPFC activity of morals and preferences was present across whole brain conjunctions and in individually localized functional regions of interest targeting the theory of mind network. By contrast, morals and facts did not elicit any neural activity in common. Follow-up item analyses suggested that the activity elicited in common by morals and preferences was explained by their shared tendency to evoke representation of mental states. We conclude that morals are represented as far more subjective than prior work has suggested. This conclusion is consistent within recent theoretical research, which has suggested that morality is fundamentally about regulating social relationships. Now, once again, empirical data is king here. You know, Christian can say all he wants, emotions are not involved when people make moral judgments. How the hell would he know? This is the sort of thing that you need to bring people into the lab for. This is the sort of thing that you need observational research for. This is not the sort of thing that you could just declare from the armchair. These are empirical questions.
Moral statements not only don't always have emotional components, but also we speak as if there is a truth of the matter. So emotivism as a theory about moral language.
We speak as if there's a truth of the matter. Look, no emotivist disagrees that in English, moral claims are expressed with declarative sentences. They all agree with this. The point of emotivism is that, hey, you know how moral claims are made as declarative sentences? Well, appearances to the contrary, they're actually not used to make propositional claims. So to say, yeah, but they look like declarative sentences, yeah, they already acknowledge that. This is very superficial, what he's presenting here. And Nitty, I very much agree. Nitty says it's the best thing for every viewer right now to sub, super chat now. I fully endorse that. So look, is this the hardest thing for people to do in the world? No. But is anyone else reviewing content and making sure and checking people on metaethics to make sure that what people say about metaethics is good? Actually, yeah, a few people do. So Travis sometimes does. I think wasn't he in the chat earlier? So there's other people that do it, but I do it the mostest. So yeah, throw some support my way if you got a chance. And I am moving soon, so I got a new house and I got a baby, and I could definitely use it. So yeah, bring it in, people. But yeah, definitely like, subscribe. I'm almost at 3,000. I saw it was 2.9. I didn't see the exact number of viewers, and I want to hit 3,000. I didn't think it would take like 4 years to do it, but oof, the algorithm hates me and my content. Let's see exactly how many viewers I currently have. 2.91. All right, let's go to the studio. 2,914. So what does that mean? I need 86 more. 86 more subscribers on a hit 3,000. We'll do some kind of party or something. And I think you're all going to love my new place. Okay. All right. I think that's the end of that video.
Is just false. It's all.
Oh, okay. Let's go to the next one. Ba, 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 ba. Hell yeah, Nitty leading the way. Gallon for the moving truck. That's probably about all we'll need. We're moving down the street. So I don't know if I mentioned, but we're building a house. We weren't super happy with the housing market here, so we just decided to build a house, and it's about done. So I will share pictures and stuff. I'll show you all the house. Maybe I'll just get on my camera and walk around the house or something to show it to you. But I'm excited to finally have my own home and not rent anymore. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. My daughter will have a place. The dogs will have somewhere outside to go. We're getting a fence. We're getting a porch. We're having all the good stuff. All right. Oh, let me check on the survey while we're at it. "12 minutes ago, 19 votes. I didn't even check the viewers. Oh, it's a pretty good number, 40. Everyone is pro-choice, no abortions." Yeah, so we'll end that. Most people agree. Very cool. All right. Okay, so let's keep going with the third video.
The heart of society. If you ask most secular, there is a moral contradiction at the heart of society. If you ask most secular people whether morality is objective or subjective, almost everyone would say it's subjective. Despite that, they act as if morality is objective at the heart of society. If you ask most secular people whether morality is objective or subjective, almost everyone would say it's subjective. Despite that,
I'm not actually sure that that's true. There aren't too many studies that just explicitly and directly ask people whether morality is objective or subjective, but typically a lot of this research is done either online on Prolific or Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which I think that's largely going to be phased out. I think it's going to be Prolific and other stuff moving forward. But those two populations are not great populations for getting a general sense of whether most people think morality is subjective, and it's very easy to explain why. So Beebe and Sakris have a paper called Moral Objectivity Across the Lifespan. What they did is they looked at research on, they cut people up into age brackets, and people in their late teens through their early to mid 20s have the lowest realist response rate and the highest anti-realist response rate of any population. And so when you're conducting studies on a college campus where it's frequently students in their first couple of years, but generally speaking, it's going to be undergraduates, they're 18 to 22, they're in the demographic range that has disproportionately high rates of anti-realism. Now, he said secular people. I don't know that secular people, like, presumably they're going to give, oh, right, of course they are. This my next statistic. So Mechanical Turk, they're disproportionately likely to be atheist and agnostic, so they're less likely to be religious. And that population is more likely to give an anti-realist response. I don't know if it's a majority of them would give the response, and it also depends on what question you're asking and how you ask it. So would most secular people say morality is subjective? If I had to guess, I'd say yes. I think he's probably right about this. But this is an empirical question, and we don't have great direct data just straight up assessing what most secular people think.
They act as if morality were still objective.
So let's look at this. So he's claiming most secular people say morality is subjective. Probably true. Again, he doesn't present any empirical data. The empirical data kind of hints in that suggestion, or it might hints in that direction, or it might support it. You could look at Goodwin and Darley's paper from 2008. That paper can probably give some insight. I don't know if I think they had a student population too, though. So what you would need is a representative sample across different age groups of secular people to get a good sense. You wouldn't want it to be biased towards student populations. Not sure how strongly representative of the secular demographic is on Amazon's Mechanical Turk of secular people more generally. So, you know, I don't think that we have particularly good data on whether most of them think that way, but I lean in the direction of thinking he's probably right about that. I don't like that he's just saying that this is the case without, he's just making an empirical claim without any empirical data. That's a little frustrating. He could have put a qualifier there, like it seems plausible or I think it's likely, but he didn't. He just asserts things as if they're true without any data. That's not responsible. Don't make psychological claims without data. The same for, you know, not exactly for the same reasons because it's not as dangerous, but like I don't go around making medical claims without knowing anything about medicine. So why is Christian going around making psychology claims without knowing anything about psychology? That's not appropriate. Okay.
These people argue that the government shouldn't.
All right. So then he's saying, okay, so people claim morality subjectively, secular people, but then they act as if it's objective. So let's see what is involved in them acting as if it's subjective.
These people argue that the government shouldn't legislate morality because morality is subjective, or that we shouldn't prevent female circumcision because morality is culturally relative. But of course, none of those statements follow. If morality is subjective, the government should not impose their morality. The legislators should impose their own morality if it's in accordance with their own morality. If morality is culturally relative, then what follows is that you should impose your morality on other cultures if your culture's morality requires it. Do you think
yeah, that's true. So some people do have this inconsistency. I don't think he's particularly wrong with this one. So most secular people might be subjectivists. A lot of those people then try to appeal to subjectivism to be anti-intervention, and subjectivism just does not entail anti-intervention. He's right about this.
All of these principles move unconsciously from morality as subject.
By the way, though, it doesn't follow that because there's that conflict that they're acting as if morality is objective. It just means that there's a conflict between their commitment to subjectivism, if they in fact have one, and their opposition to the imposition of one's values on others. It doesn't follow from a contradiction that therefore they're objectivists or they're acting like morality is objective. So ultimately his main thesis is wrong, but his particular set of observations is right. It would be non sequitur to conclude from those facts alone that people act like morality is objective. So in other words, he has not said anything so far to show that people act like morality is objective.
Was your morality on?
Now let's go back.
Should not impose their morality. The legislators should impose their own morality if it's in accordance with their own morality. If morality is culturally relative, then what follows is that you should impose your morality on other cultures if your culture's morality requires it. She thinks all of these principles move unconsciously from morality as subjective to here are some objective principles, specifically that one should not make laws based off of someone's subjective preferences, that one should impose their own preferences on other cultures. These are all the assumptions that these so-called subjectivists implicitly make.
Yeah, this is a bit silly. So what he's not doing, I mean, first of all, he keeps saying subjectivism, and then his examples were all instances of cultural relativism. So when it comes to the relativization of moral standards, relativization involves indexing the truth claims towards some standard or other. So as long as the truth of the claims is being indexed, in other words, when you make the truth claim, whether it's true or false depends on which standard it's being indexed to. We already use indexes all the time in ordinary speech. If I say I am Lance is true, if you say I am Lance, unless you're also named Lance, it's false. The word I there is functioning as the indexical. When I say I, I'm referring to me. When you say I, you're referring to you. So who it's referring to changes, and that allows the truth status of the sentence I am Lance to vary based on who's saying it, because I refers to whoever's making the claim. Relativism holds that when people make moral claims, they are indexing them implicitly to some standard or other. It could be explicit, but it's typically implicit. So when a person says stealing is wrong, it would mean something like stealing is wrong according to my standards, or stealing is wrong according to the standards of my culture. That's one distinction. Is that what it's relativized to could be individuals or could be groups, could be something else too, but it's typically people or cultures. So he's not drawing that distinction out here. He keeps saying subjectivism, which is typically used to, or at least frequently used to express individual relativism, not cultural relativism or group relativism. But then he gives an example of cultural relativism. It's weird. The second thing is that it really matters whether we're talking about agent relativism or appraiser relativism. He doesn't draw that distinction out either. It sounds like he's only talking about agent relativism, which is something critics of relativist views frequently do. Agent relativism holds that whether an action is right or wrong depends on the standards of the agent or the culture of the agent performing the action. And so if you're a cultural agent relativist and there is a culture and that culture approves of torturing its citizens or gassing them or whatever, then on that view, it's good for them to do so. They should do so. Now, That's repugnant. I don't like that. So I'm not on board with that. But if you're an appraiser relativist, you judge the actions of individuals and groups as right or wrong according to the standards of whoever is doing the appraising or the cultural standards of the person doing the appraising. So in that view, you could say, yeah, that culture should not impose, gassing people or doing terrible things or genociding or whatever, because I'm against it. I'm judging them by my standards or my culture standards. And so if people are individual appraiser subjectivists or individual appraiser relativists, same thing. There's not really an issue with them saying the laws should not be based on people's preferences, because that person can hold a second order view, which says something like, our laws, they can have a view like this. On my view, the laws should be such and such, or the laws should go through this constructivist process where we develop laws through democratic processes. And if they hold a view like that, then they would not be committed to thinking that the content of the laws should just vary from one person to another or be willy-nilly or something like that. So Christian is selling us here a very crude, silly, simple version of relativism. It's unclear whether he's talking about agent or appraiser relativism. It's unclear whether he's talking about cultural or individual relativism. He's not disambiguating the different conceptions of relativism. And then he's selling the relativists as having extremely crude and silly views where they're not able to handle basic normative considerations and applied considerations. They absolutely can. It's not even difficult for them to do so. So if I'm an appraiser, individual relativist, I can have the exact same normative views as any moral realist. I could simply say the law should look like this. We should do things this way. But why? Because I prefer it that way. And there's absolutely no issue. Relativists do not have issues comporting their standards, attitudes, values, and behavior with the way that people ordinarily behave. Agent relativists might in some cases. And he is pointing to some tensions between some of the things some people say when they say that they're relativists, and then they say things that are in tension with their alleged commitment to relativism. One, it does not follow that because people hold those contradictory views that actually they're acting like objectivists or thinking like objectivists. No, it would mean that they're acting or speaking or thinking like confused people with inconsistent and internally inconsistent views, which happens all the time. So he has not done the work to show that people actually act or think or do anything like objectivists. Second, he's presented a confused, ambiguous caricature of relativism that fails to do it proper justice. So he's failed on both fronts. His conclusions doesn't follow from the setup he's presented, and the setup he's presented only applies narrowly to some unspecified number of people. This is not a good critique.
A lot of people say that they believe morality is subjective, but then they act as if it were actually objective.
Yeah, he hasn't said a word to show that they act as if it's objective. So, yes, very disappointing. All right, next video.
What they're committed to. Like on the surface, it sounds super.
It already started.
A lot of people who call themselves moral relativists don't actually know what they're committed to. Like on the surface, it sounds super hippie and live and let live. And hey, if that's cool by you, man, that's fine. Who am I to judge? But in practice, what that means is you can't actually condemn any of the worst things to have ever happened.
Good Lord. Good Lord. Oh, okay. I will get to this, but this is amazing. I just got $20 from Matt Springfield. What's up, Matt? Thank you very much. That is massively appreciated. Shout out to Matt, everybody in the chat. Hell yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's going to go a long way. I'll show you some of the stuff that I'm planning on putting in the room. Oh man, I don't want to show you the disc plate that I got. So I got a disc plate. I don't know if you know what those are, but it's like a metal poster. It's more durable. I had all these really cool posters. Yeah, I don't want to show you stuff before I get it. Okay, I'll just tell you about it. So I got some Disco Elysium stuff that I want to put in the room. I've got my eye on a Tactics Ogre. I don't know if I mentioned, but my favorite video game of all time. It was released on the Super Nintendo in Japan, but then they ported it over to the original like PS1, the PlayStation. It's called Tactics Ogre: Let Us Cling Together. It was re-released on the PSP, I believe in the 2000s, maybe 2006 or 2008 or something. I don't know exactly when. I never had a PSP, so I didn't get it. And then it was also re-released, I think, 3 years ago on the computer under the name Tactics Ogre Reborn. I don't like some of the changes they made to it, but it's on the PC. I'm a PC person, so they got rid of random encounters. I love random encounters. That was my favorite thing in that game. So it's an amazing game. So I've had my eye on something on Etsy on Tactics Ogre that I've really wanted for a while now. But with all the stuff, having a baby, paying all the bills, doing all that stuff, I haven't justified getting decorations. But I want to make my background look cool, but I do have had people encourage keeping the bookshelf empty. So technically it's not empty. There's actually drawers down there. Well, let's keep the mystique. It's empty. It's totally empty. There's nothing in it. So let me, and then I'll get to your comment, Matt. Don't worry. It's still there. Let's do another poll. I'm two stream of thought. So let's see. Should I keep the empty bookshelf in my background when I move? Oh, everybody likes the I don't know option, so I'll put that in there. All right, Matt, let's have a look at your comment. Thanks for your contributions to quality philosophical dialogue on YouTube. I think you have an important voice in the space, despite the fact that we probably disagree on a fair amount. I love that. I love specifically the disagreement. There is almost nothing better than good disagreement. I like when people agree. Don't get me wrong. Don't let me sell you on the idea that I just want everybody to disagree with me so I can argue with people all day. Nah. If I could push a button and everybody agrees with me, I probably would. I mean, I might get a little bored, but I think the advantages of everybody agreeing with me would outweigh the disadvantages of not having people to argue with anymore. So I will say that. That's the truth. I want people to agree with me. But we're in a world with disagreement. Might as well make the best of it, right? So, you know, I might have mentioned, you know, I had a roommate when I first started grad school who was like a Catholic. They were a libertarian. They had all these views very contrary to my own. And not that I'm like a raving political person, but they had very different views than me. They were substance dualist. So I learned so much from them. It was such a blast. I love when people that hold contrary views can get along and have productive disagreements. That being said, it does often look like I get pretty feisty with some people that disagree. I don't like bad attitudes. And I often have a bad attitude in response. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've been on the fence for that for a while. And yeah, but I prefer when people get along. So really, really appreciate the comment. We'll leave it up there. That's amazing. Thank you so much. All right. And Gus Schultz plays, holy cow, got here late, but managed to catch up on 1.25 speed. Grant Miller says, love Tactics Ogre and all the Matsuno's games. Well, you might know more about, I don't know what, is that the person that makes the games? I've heard that similar stuff inspired Disgaea. I've never played those, and Final Fantasy Tactics. So if you like Final Fantasy, and Matt, I'll leave this back up here. Final Fantasy Tactics is a phenomenal game and very, very similar to Tactics Ogre. There's been a couple other, there's a Tactics Ogre Knight of Lotus, awesome game. That was also very good. I really liked it. So yeah, I really like those tactics games. There's a new one that came out on the PC. I'll give a shout out to it. It's called Fail Seal Arbiter's Mark and is inspired by similar gameplay, very similar to Final Fantasy Tactics in terms of gameplay. It has a linear storyline, but the storyline is okay. I didn't have a problem with it. But the characters in it are good. Yeah. I found some stupid ways to cheese the game and make it trivially easy, but whatever. People really call this a power move. Says empty bookshelf is such a power move. Look at these. Man, I'm getting some love today. There's been a lot of hate, but getting some love. Also, check out my video over on Miles Donahue's channel. We did a collaboration. Gus says, love your work, Lance. Been my favorite philosophy since I discovered you a year or two ago. Awesome. Good to hear it. Marmotter says, empty bookshelf is like an entity of its own that boosts cognitive ability. That's why Graham Oppie has it. Grant Miller. Yeah, he was the director. Well, he did a phenomenal job. Matsuno, is that the name? Shout out to Matsuno. If anything, the game, probably people that know about the game, it is highly rated. I guess it's got a cult following, but it should be more popular. So it is highly regarded, but it should be more popular. Tactics Ogre is truly kick-ass. Awesome storyline. Yeah, real RPG elements. So you make decisions in the game. And once you make that decision, it locks you into the storylines and the consequences of your decisions. And the first heavy decision you have to make is hardcore. Like, I'm not even going to tell you what it is, because if you get to that point in the game, you're going to go, holy shit, this game is not playing around. This is not a game for kids. It's good stuff. It's dated. Don't get me wrong. It's got Super Nintendo graphics, but it's quite nice. Okay. All right. That's enough of that jibber jabber. Let's get back to the videos.
Happened in human history. Like genocide,
All right.
A lot of people who call
over.
themselves moral relativists don't actually know what they're committed to. Like on the surface, it sounds super hippie and live and let live. And hey, if that's cool by you, man, that's fine. Who am I to judge? But in practice, what that means is you can't actually condemn any of the worst things to have ever happened in.
This is false. Christian, shame on you. So this is why the agent and appraiser distinction is really important. Absolutely nothing about, actually, there's a sense in which both could, but let's take appraiser relativism. On appraiser relativism, you judge other people and cultures by your standards or the standards of your culture. And so if they're doing things that are inconsistent with your culture, you can absolutely condemn them. It's straightforwardly false, 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 false with a capital F, that if you're a relativist, you're unable to condemn other people and cultures. Shame on you, Christian. This is embarrassingly bad. You're just wrong about this. You are objectively, stance independently wrong. You need to distinguish agent and appraiser relativism. Appraiser relativism, not only does it allow you to condemn other people and cultures, it would actually mandate that you do so. So if your culture condemns the practices of another culture, that other culture is wrong. You got to condemn them. So he's just wrong about this. This is silly. Now, if you're an agent relativist, what if it's part of your own culture standards to judge other cultures? Now you're going to get a weird tension. I don't know how agent relativists are supposed to resolve that, because agent relativism holds that whether an action is right or wrong depends on the standards of the agent or the culture of the agent performing the action. So now if you run into a person from another culture, their actions would be good if they're acting in a way consistent with their culture, even if they're inconsistent with your standards and your culture. So can you condemn them? What if it's part of your culture to condemn them? I don't know at that point, but suppose it's not. Suppose, no, you're committed to agent culture relativism. You got to judge them by the standards of their culture. Okay, then you can't consistent with agent culture relativism, judge people acting in accordance with their culture's standards. Okay, so this only applies to certain forms of agent relativism. It does not apply to appraiser relativism. That would be a better way to make a critique, to be explicit about this being a critique of agent relativism, not appraiser relativism.
Human history. Like, genocide is totally fine if by the culture who's imposing the genocide, they think it's fine. Slavery, perfectly valid. Whatever was going on Epstein's island, hey, who are we to judge, right? If it's fine by them. And see, the thing is, you can be a perfectly consistent moral relativist. But the problem is a lot of people who claim to be moral relativists don't actually know that they're committed to saying all of those horrible things aren't really horrible, and it's just a matter of preference. The same way I like chocolate and someone likes vanilla. There's no real disagreement to be had. And even saying, oh, hey, all of those terrible things are bad according to me, you're basically just saying you like chocolate again. So you can be...
Yeah, so if you're an appraiser relativist, why is that a problem? You could be against things. What's the problem?
Be a relativist, but just know what you're committed to.
Yeah, well, Christian, maybe if you put the effort into drawing a distinction between agent and appraiser relativism and don't present relativism without drawing the distinction, people wouldn't be misled by your content. Shame on you. Sorry if I get annoyed by this, but Christian, again, happy to talk to you. Nothing against you personally. That's a bad video. You're not drawing out the distinction between agent and appraiser relativism. Imagine I take two denominations of Christianity and I point out a serious flaw with one version of Christianity. Have I refuted Christianity? No. Would it be appropriate for me to say Christianity is wrong because, and then point to some like specific Calvinist doctrine? No. It's important if there's a distinction to draw out, disambiguate the distinction and make clear that your critique applies to one form and not the other. Christian didn't do that. That's not careful work. And that's why I'm frustrated by this. I'm frustrated by this because Christian could do better. He could have made a video saying, hey, there's agent and appraiser relativism. Agent relativism holds this, appraiser relativism holds that. Here's a problem with agent relativism. If you're an agent relativist, let's say you're a cultural agent relativist, then you're committed to thinking that if a person from another culture is engaged in genocide and their culture is pro-genocide, that it's good for them or it's more acceptable or whatever for them to engage in genocide. You might not want to endorse that. So be sure that you know what you're committed to if you're going to endorse agent cultural relativism. Then I would have no objections. I'd be very happy with that. I'd give it a thumbs up. But I don't like when critics of relativism don't draw out the distinction between agent and appraiser relativism, and they point out the dastardly and awful implications of agent relativism without acknowledging or engaging with appraiser relativism at all. I don't think that's an appropriate way to handle the topic. It's not treating it with the proper care, precision, and disambiguation that's necessary to handle the metaethical landscape appropriately. It gives the misleading picture that he's refuted relativism when at best he's only raised considerably undesirable. Let's say he's refuted agent relativism. It's going to be super unpalatable. I don't even know if he's making that claim. Okay, what about appraisal relativism? So really, really disappointing. He could do better than that. And I hope he does. I hope he sees this and does a better video where he addresses these things better than he has here. I'm not really, if I get frustrated, it's not because I'm like, how dare you? That's the end of the line. Do a better video. I didn't catch this, Sapir. He didn't say you can't condemn them. He said you can actually condemn them. Let's replay that.
A lot of people who call themselves moral relativists don't actually know what they're committed to. Like, on the surface, it sounds super hippie and live and let live. And hey, if that's cool by you, man, that's fine. Who am I to judge? But in practice, what that means is you can't actually condemn any of the work.
Yeah, it actually might be an intensifier there, Sapir. I don't know if he's using actually in the misleading modifier sense. So not sure I have a big issue with that. Yeah, people are mocking that. Actually, truly, really, yeah, genuinely. There's a lot of those misleading modifiers, but I'm not really sure he was doing that here. See, I used a modifier myself. Okay, next video. How many of these we got?
Okay. The most common objection to
and all of these.
Do you know who?
I'll just point out for something with TikTok, it doesn't let me it just starts playing the videos as soon as I open them. So these are all going to be partially opened.
Do you know who shot? Do you know who?
Hold on. They're all going to be partially started when I go into them, and I'm going to have to take it back to the beginning. Sorry, that started like 6 times.
Do you know who shot JFK? The most common objection to objective morality is, if morality is objective, why do we disagree? Here are 3 reasons why that argument does not work. First, there are so many disagreements about factual, non-moral questions all the time. JFK, for instance. If you look into it, you're not going to walk out of there certain about anything, and everyone's going to walk out of there with a different conclusion. Does that mean there's no fact of the matter? Of course not. Number 2, a lot of the moral disagreements you see are selected for. So it gives the impression that there's way more disagreement than there actually is. A lot of the moral debates are about cases like, should you kill one person to save 5? Should you torture an innocent child to bring about utopia? These are not normal cases. We all pretty much agree murder and torture are wrong in most cases. Does this mean we don't disagree? Of course not. It just means the amount of disagreement is vastly overstated because there's selection effects at play here. You're not going to debate cases where you all agree. And third, a lot of the moral disagreements actually depend on factual disagreements.
Yeah, so most of this is true. The typical objection that people would raise where, hey, lots of people disagree about moral issues, therefore, moral anti-realism, is not by itself a good objection, and largely for the reasons that he raises here. People disagree about all sorts of stuff. That's not a good indicator that there's no stance-independent fact of the matter. What was his second objection? I already lost track.
Actually is. A lot of the moral
selection effects. Yeah, he's probably right about that. So the kinds of things people focus on when they argue about moral issues are going to be the controversial issues, because who's going to argue that it's morally wrong to, I don't know, evaporate the ocean and kill all the fish? Why would anyone consider that? It's a ridiculous scenario. Would it be morally wrong to blow up the moon? Yeah, no one's going to blow up the moon. So there's just a vast list of things everybody's going to agree on, or most people are going to agree on. And so really what we're looking at is the kind of stuff that is selected for as matters of disagreement. And so we tend to overestimate the amount of disagreement that there is. But I also think that Christian is not considering like, oh, everybody's against torture. What is he talking about? Were the Romans against torture? Hell no. Were people in the past against torture? Hell no. People used to gather to watch hangings. They used to enjoy and clap along while people got executed. All throughout history, people were brutal. They had slaves. They had no problem killing people. Infanticide has been practiced all over the world. People have been vicious, harsh, brutal, and nasty for a huge proportion of world history. And so it's easy to say, well, the people around me mostly agree with me. Yeah. And people could say that back when people owned slaves. They could say that back when it was typical to see someone get crucified. Yeah, we all generally agree that heretics should be crucified. I mean, am I right? I mean, they are heretics, right? So who are you comparing yourself to? Even if we went back to the 1950s, we'd find people that are backwards, and there's people alive from the 1950s. My dad's alive, and he was born in the 40s. So, moral standards have changed quite recently, quite rapidly in a way that's quite different in Western society from much of the moral standards of people throughout history and in the world today. Does Christian think that people in Papua New Guinea have the same moral standards as he does? I very much doubt that they do. People in Yemen, do they have his moral standards? Probably not. People in China, probably not. Conservatives, liberals, there's quite like, look, yeah, if there are contexts in which we overstate how much moral disagreement there is, but there's also ways in which we understate how much moral disagreement that there is. And I don't think we'll get to his third point, and then I'll address that too.
Debates are about cases like, should you kill one person to save 5? Should you torture an innocent child to bring about utopia? These are not normal cases. We all pretty much agree murder and torture are wrong in most cases. Does this mean we don't disagree? Of course not. It just means the amount of disagreement is vastly overstated because there's...
Yeah, I mean, he's not. So he's pointing to ways in which it's overstated. He's not pointing to ways in which it's understated. And I don't know what would happen if you weighed those two against one another.
Selection effects at play here. You're not going to debate cases where you all agree. And third, a lot...
Yeah, so just generally speaking, the point here would be that I think that his presentation there is kind of one-sided, probably a bit motivated. He's presenting considerations that count against widespread disagreement, but he's not considering ways in which there would be more disagreement than he's appreciating. So in other words, he's only focusing on ways in which it's overestimated rather than underestimated.
A lot of the moral disagreements actually depend on factual disagreements. So take human sacrifice, for instance. See, a lot of the natives believe that if you didn't do the sacrifice, the sun wouldn't come up tomorrow. If they found out that, no, the sun was going to come up regardless, they wouldn't think the sacrifice was right. There's a disagreement about a descriptive fact. Or abortion. A lot of the disagreement in abortion comes down to, is a fetus sentient? Or does the fetus have a soul? These are disagreements about descriptive reality, about consciousness, about metaphysics, not about morality per se. These arguments are based off of Michael Huemer's ethical...
Yeah, so he's not wrong about the third point either. A lot of seemingly like a lot of apparent moral disagreement is actually disagreement about non-moral facts. But again, we shouldn't overestimate how much of that disagreement is just due to non-moral facts. Yeah, I mean, if you knew there was a pissed off sun god, would you sacrifice people? Would you round up people, kidnap them, and sacrifice them? Because I might say, fuck that god. I'm not sacrificing shit. Well, I'm going to blow up the earth. Then do it, you asshole, because I'm not going to live in a world where we got to kill people. That's a sentiment. I'm not necessarily saying I'd do that. Maybe I'd be like, all right, I guess we got to sacrifice people if he's really going to blow up the world. Maybe I'd reluctantly do it. But, you know, would everybody? I don't think so. I don't think that they would. So, I mean, take the Judith Jarvis Thompson and the sort of classical philosophical defenses of abortion. They start by saying, yeah, fine. Let's just accept that they're people and we're killing them. I'm arguing that it's morally permissible anyway. So while it is sometimes the case that the pro-choice stance will be, they're not sentient, they're not conscious yet. A lot of times, the standard appeal is bodily autonomy, and that's not even the major factor in dispute. And so there might be some disputes about certain non-moral facts, but people still at the end of the day do appear to me to have differences in their values. But this is, peeling back the layers to see how much of the agreement or disagreement is due to non-moral beliefs versus differences in moral values. That's a very, very tough empirical nut to crack. But I don't really see what the point would be. So in demonstrating this, so there's some unspecified amount of moral disagreement or not. How does that help us with determining whether realism is true or not? Couldn't Christian just say, yeah, okay, lots of people, even if lots of people disagreed, who gives a shit? It doesn't really matter. Lots of people disagree about religion. Does that mean whether or not Jesus rose from the dead is a matter of personal preference? Of course not. So it's kind of weird to engage at that point. I mean, I guess you defang the, hey, there's lots of disagreement point, but let's not undersell what the argument that appeals to disagreement is trying to do. Now, there could be a crude version that moves, there is a crude version that appeals directly to disagreement. So, lots of people disagree. That's a good sign that there's no fact of the matter. The question, a better question would be, well, what if people that were similarly well situated epistemically were unable to resolve their disagreements? It would appear to indicate that we lack the epistemic resources or tools to address the question. And that, on Bayesian grounds and on broadly abductive grounds, would be some indication that, well, here's an alternative explanation. The reason why we're unable to address these questions in a satisfactory way and converge is because there isn't a fact of the matter to converge on. And so better versions of arguments from disagreement appeal to peer disagreement. They appeal to disagreement among people with relevant knowledge or expertise. They appeal to the insolubility of the disagreements over time or when employing shared methodology. And so these arguments can be bolstered and improved. There's a big difference between people disagree on the shape of the earth, therefore there's no fact of the matter, and people disagree on this particular scientific model, despite like even the expert scientists that have studied it for 1,000 years and have all this data, they still disagree. That's when you might start questioning whether there's a fact of the matter. And that would be a better thing for people to appeal to, is to say, look, moral issues appear to be insoluble. There don't appear to be methods for addressing them in a way where we could get at the objective truth. Now, that might only lead more favorably towards moral skepticism, meaning the position that we can't obtain knowledge of moral truth, than to the direct position that there is no moral truth, or no objective moral truth, or no non-relative moral truth. Sorry, there's so much terminology, but it's the sort of thing that if you were looking at an all things considered list that counts more in favor of one view or another, this would be stuff that you would like put on the anti-realist side. Is it dispositive? Like, does it settle the matter? No. But if people readily converge, just take 100 people, take them outside, point in a particular direction and say, what's over there? And all 100 of them go, there's a tree. Okay. Pretty good evidence that there's a tree over there, right? It's not sure. Like, it's not like foolproof, because it could be that it's an illusion or whatever. Or it could be that you paid 99 people to lie and the last person goes, all right. And there's like ash conformity going on and they say there's a tree. They don't really see one. There's other things that could be going on, but all else being equal, if you take 100 people, you take them outside, you point in a direction and say, what's over there? And all 100 say there's a tree. Good indication, all else being equal, that there's a tree. What if 50 of them say there's a tree and 50 of them don't, and they're standing in a similar location? Now we got an issue. That is what people appealing to disagreement are pointing to. They're not just pointing to disagreement. They're pointing to disagreement. Well, some of them are, and then they're making a stupid argument, but they could point to better, more advanced versions of disagreement arguments. And I don't know why he's pushing this book, but let's just hear what he has to say.
I'm going to have Professor Humor on my podcast in a couple of weeks where I'm going to press him on these exact issues.
Let me know. That's why. Okay, that makes sense.
In the comments below what questions I should ask him. And you can subscribe.
Cool. All right. Next video, that was objective. All right.
If objective morality were cooked, if objective morality is not true, then a lot of the social fabric will slowly start to fall apart, and arguably already has started to. See, one of the things that people who deny objective morality say is, oh, it's actually not a big deal because we have plenty of reasons to be moral anyways in our own ways, and that's totally fine. And these people are usually what's called Humeans, which means that the only reason you ever have to do something is if you want to. And a lot of us want to do what we would normally call moral things, so we'll be fine in the end. But this just completely misunderstands the situation. Take the famous thought experiment by Peter Singer, for instance. He says that if you saw a drowning child and you had to ruin your nice pair of shoes to save him, you would probably do it and you would feel like you should do it. Similarly, you can, for a very similar amount of money, save a child in Africa right now. So if you're going to be consistent, you should donate now. The problem is, if we're Humeans and if we think the only thing that gives us a reason to do anything is if we want to, realistically, most of us don't actually want to donate a lot of money. The satisfaction we get from doing the quote unquote right thing is just not that much more pleasurable than like living a life of luxury. So if morality ultimately just comes down to whatever we want to do, man, then so many of the things that we would consider moral, all the sacrifices that morality seems to require of us for the good of everyone else, for the good of cooperation, for the good of cohesion, gets thrown out the wayside because in practice, most of us don't actually want to sacrifice.
This is ridiculous. This is the worst one yet. So how it's all, he hasn't presented any evidence that people are currently realists and that if they became anti-realists, that would cause problems. So that's already an issue. So the presumption here is if people became anti-realists, this would lead to a collapse in society. Why? So he's making this claim, oh, people don't actually want to sacrifice or do these things. Yes, they fucking do. That's why they do them. So, okay, let's say you're an anti-realist, all right? So there's things you care about, and then you do the things that you care about. Let's say you're a realist. Okay, so there's things you think are objectively good. Okay, and how do you end up doing them? It's because you want to do those things. So then you do them. You don't just magically do them. So if his picture of the world is that you have to have people think things are objectively good or bad in order for them to be motivated to do these things that he and I would agree are good, like helping people, social cohesion. What is the empirical evidence that the only reason people currently do any of those things is because they think it's objectively good to do so? Because if he doesn't have evidence of that, then he doesn't have any evidence that if people don't think that, then they won't do it. They won't be motivated to do it. And he doesn't have evidence of that. We do not have good empirical evidence that most people are realists or act like realists, because it doesn't require acting like a realist to care about social cohesion. Take all the stuff that he mentioned. Let's take a look.
That's just human nature. So the problem is, if we're humans and if we think the only thing that gives us a reason to do anything is if we want to, realistically, most of us don't actually want to donate a lot of money. Satisfaction.
So most people don't want to donate money. So then how do you get them to donate money? You convince them that it's objectively right to donate money. We can look at the data right now on people that are effective altruists. I believe there's meta-ethical data on them. A hell of a lot of those people are anti-realists and they're donating. Do you know why those people donate to charity? Because they want to, because they care about other people. So, I don't even know how to respond to this. He would have to show empirical evidence that people would not do good things unless they were realists, and that this is a substantial portion of the population. There is no good fucking evidence for that, none at all. There's a couple quite poorly constructed studies with significant methodological problems. This is Ryan Holyoake from 2013 and Young and Derwin from 2013. So I'll tell you a bit about those studies. Okay, so those are two of the only behavioral studies that look at the behavioral consequences of attempting to prime people to endorse realism or anti-realism and then look at their subsequent behavior. So the Young and Derwin study had canvassers stand in the street in Boston, and they would approach people and they'd pitch a charity to them. And then at some point, they would present a phrase to them. So let me pull up the phrase. Let me pull up the paper. Here's the paper. It's called Moral Realism as Moral Motivation, the Impact of Metaethics on Everyday Decision-Making. Let me find exactly what they said to the people. Okay, so this is the question that they presented people in the anti-realism, in the realism condition. So in the middle of this pitch, they would give them one question, and they would say this, and this is like a 5 or 6 minutes of a pitch. So this one line in there: do you agree that some things are just morally right or wrong, good or bad, wherever you happen to be from in the world? Now, and then most people said yes to that. That's the realism prime. Now, is that an accurate representation of realism? Do you agree that some things are just morally right or wrong, good or bad, wherever you happen to be from in the world? No, it's not. That is not an accurate representation of the idea that there are stance-independent moral truths. Maybe it's universalism. Do you agree that some things are just morally right or wrong, good or bad, wherever you happen to be from in the world? Unclear what exactly that means, but it's not a clear representation of realism. And so it couldn't serve as an appropriate prime of realism unless you could demonstrate that that prime question increased people's belief in moral realism. Now, did they measure the participants' belief in moral realism? No, they didn't. So we don't have evidence of a successful experimental manipulation. We don't have evidence that those people had any increased endorsement of realism to show that their subsequent greater willingness to donate was caused by an increased belief in realism. Here's the anti-realism prime. Do you agree that our morals and values are shaped by our culture and upbringing, so it is up to each person to discover his or her own moral truths? It's not a valid representation of relativism or anti-realism. Why? Well, look at the first part. First of all, it's double-barreled, which is not good. They're giving them two things. The first part of this is, do you agree that our morals and values are shaped by our culture and upbringing? Well, who would disagree with that? Everybody should agree with that. That is totally orthogonal to relativism. And then the second part is, so it's up to each person to discover their own moral truths. Is that implying some kind of subjectivism? Yes. Is it doing a good job of it? No. And it's wedding that latter portion of the claim to the former claim in a way that makes it not just double-barreled, but a conditional. This is not a good way of manipulating belief in anti-realism. It's not even clear if they would interpret the latter part of that in distinctively anti-realist terms. And again, we don't really know whether they interpret it in anti-realist terms. Now, this doubled both the probability that they donate and the amount that they donated. So you get 4 times as much donations. Do you find it reasonable? I suspect, I don't know how the effect size is that large, but I suspect if you replicated this study, you wouldn't find an effect size that big. They didn't use valid primings. So let's look at the Ryan Holyoake paper. So the Ryan Holyoake paper is also from 2013. They both came out the same year for some reason. Exposure to moral relativism compromises moral behavior. And they explicitly say, look, metaethical relativism is distinct from the idea that you have to be tolerant towards other people and cultures. Now, they acknowledge that, but then look at their priming condition that they say, that they give people. Got to find it. Where is it? Yeah, okay. In the moral relativism condition, participants were told that our moral values are subjective opinions and we cannot impose them on another group of people because they see this, they're talking about FGM, as a necessary purifying act. And this continues. It's a giant parenthetical. I don't want to read it all. Okay, it doesn't matter. So the point is here, they say, in the relativism condition, participants were told that our moral values are subjective opinions and we cannot impose them on another group of people. This is confounded. So they tell them morality is subjective. Who knows whether they understood what that means in metaethical terms or not. And then they tell them, so we can't impose their values on other people. Now, that doesn't follow from them being subjective. So they gave them false information and they gave them normative information, and they confounded that with the relativism prime, not a valid priming condition. And then this is what they did in the realism condition. Participants are told that some moral values are objectively right or wrong, and it is our duty to impose our values on other groups of people, regardless of what they believe. Again, they're both giving you a meta-ethical claim and a normative moral claim. It's your duty to impose your standards on others. That's not an implication of moral realism. You could be a realist and think it's wrong to impose your standards on other people. So both of their priming conditions are confounded. So the two methods that we have for manipulating people's metaethical views didn't work because one had a confound and one just isn't even face valid. And in any case, I don't think either measured people's actual metaethical views. So in terms of the empirical research on what actually happens when you cause increases or decreases in people's metaethical views, we don't know because we don't have valid measures of this stuff. So you have those two studies. We don't really have any other studies as far as I know. There's been a few little things here and there, but nothing particularly strong. Christian here is making a whole bunch of empirical assumptions about human psychology. He's presented absolutely no empirical evidence for any of these claims. Absolutely not. Now, I am a psychologist specializing specifically in the study of whether or not ordinary people, non-philosophers, are moral realists or not. I also look at studies on how it affects their behavior. You could see that because you could see that I'm immediately aware of these studies and I was immediately able to find this stuff in the studies. I've written about this work in my dissertation. You could see it in the supplemental section where I wrote extensive critiques. They're basically like little mini essays responding to both of those papers at length. So I did my homework and I went and looked at the empirical literature. There's Fisher et al. From 2017. There's a variety of other studies that look at correlations between metaethical views and other sorts of things like personality traits. There's a Feltz and Coakley paper. There's a variety of empirical studies on this sort of thing. The Fisher et al. Paper looked at priming people and then seeing if they're more or less cooperative. No, it looked at priming them people to be cooperative or competitive and then seeing whether they were more likely to endorse relativism or anti-realism afterwards. And they were when it was cooperative rather than competitive, I believe. So there's a variety of research on these topics. And if you want to take the question of what are the behavioral implications, again, behavioral implications, the societal and individual implications of how people respond to and be motivated by a change in their metaethical beliefs, you're talking about psychology. Christian is here talking about human psychology and is engaging with absolutely zero empirical literature. This is embarrassing, 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 embarrassing. I cannot emphasize enough how embarrassing that is. Imagine if I was on here on TikTok or on YouTube making medical claims without looking at any empirical literature and not studying the topic at all. Imagine I was on here talking about geography or history without doing any of the research, any research on the topic. That is what Christian is doing. And it's not just that it's misguided and unsubstantiated. It's irresponsible for people to go around constantly talking about psychology without doing the fucking research. I did the research, and it pisses me off how many people in academic philosophy keep talking psychology, 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 and they don't look at a fucking paper on the topic. Okay? I'm sick of it. I am sick of constant talking about psychology without studying any of it. Gets no respect. People would probably get banned if they were going around giving bullshit medical advice. They flag channels where people go around talking about the flat earth. But you could say whatever bullshit you want about psychology, and it's not flagged, and nobody cares. And I'm absolutely tired of it. Stop this shit. If you want to talk about psychology, study psychology. Jesus. I'm so sick of it. I got gray hair and lost my fucking hair studying this topic only for people to ignore it and scoff at me and block me and act like assholes. When I say, hey, you're making empirical claims and you're talking about psychology, and they ignore. They don't come back on TikTok or Substack or YouTube later saying, hey, I went and I read the Young and Derwin paper and I disagree with Lance. Here's why I think they did show. Or they don't run and go and get a degree in psychology and run their own damn studies. They don't go out and canvass people. They don't go out and do surveys and polls. They don't go out and learn the empirical stuff. They don't go out and learn R and learn to code and learn how to do the statistical analyses necessary to figure these things out. They don't write grants. They don't get the money to do cross-cultural empirical research to find out how do people use moral language in Spanish? Or how do they use it in like the Basque language? How do they use it in Mandarin? How do they use it in Mongolian or Japanese or the languages in New Guinea? Or how do Australian Aboriginals think about metaethical issues? They don't do any of that research. They don't do any studies, any research. They don't even read this shit. They don't even listen to me. And when they do listen to me, they fucking ignore me. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous for people to keep talking about psychology constantly and not study any of it. How many times? I've been doing this for 4 years now. People keep making empirical claims. People think this. People would do that. You are talking about psychology. This is not analytic philosophy. These are not a priori claims. You're not talking about concepts. You're not talking about intuitions that you personally have. You're talking about how people respond to things. You are doing psychology. You are doing anthropology. You are doing sociology. You are doing comparative linguistics, and you're not engaging with any of it. Any. And I'm happy to talk to you about it, and I won't be yelling at you. I'm alone here. So I can be pissed off about this. But this is how I really feel about this stuff. I bust my ass reading the empirical literature on this for people to continue to make empirical claims and then scoff and scoff and scoff. I have a video that I'm going to show you with David Enoch talking about how most people are moral realist or whatever, or most people are committed to moral realism. Right after having a conversation with me where he kept saying empirical stuff doesn't matter. Okay, so then why are you making empirical claims? Or is that somehow not an empirical claim? It's somehow not an empirical claim to talk about what people think or how people use language. Those are empirical claims. If you want to address empirical questions, you need to use empirical methods. This is not complicated. Why don't my critics acknowledge this? Why don't they acknowledge we're making empirical claims and we just don't want to do the work? Are you lazy? Do you just not want to do the work? I went and got a whole freaking PhD and spent 8 years of my life learning how to do this stuff. And you can't spend one day reading 2 or 3 papers? Why don't you read Young and Derwin? Why not? Why don't you read the paper? It's like 5 pages. You could read it in 30 minutes. And then talk about that on here instead of getting your cues on how people think from Michael Huemer. Look, Michael Huemer might be a great philosopher. A lot of people love his work. He has that intro to philosophy book, and I've heard great things. I heard great things from somebody that doesn't like Michael Huemer that said, that's a damn good book, okay? But Michael Huemer does not study empirical moral psychology. I do. Thomas Polzler does. Jeff Goodwin does. Jennifer Wright does. I don't know how to say his name. Zylstra does. Taylor Davis does. James Beebe does. These are the people that have done the empirical work to actually try to figure out how people think about things. Now, am I critical of this work? Yes. But for instance, I'll critique some of these authors, and then they send me emails saying, thanks for the critique. They may agree with me. They may disagree with me. So when I criticize people, and when I criticize Christian here, again, it's not personal. I am passionate about studying this topic. I've spent over 10 years studying the psychology of metaethics, what I now call experimental metaethics. I really care about this topic. And it's just such a gross disservice to go around saying people think this way, people react that way, and to not give a flying fuck about what the empirical data shows. It's not appropriate. You don't go around. Imagine I had a whole video talking about chimpanzee behavior, and I never did a damn bit of work to look at how chimpanzees behave, right? It's not just I've never even been to a zoo, right? It's that I'm not a zoologist. I'm not a primatologist. I don't take courses on the topic. And then I don't even read books on the topic. That's what that would be like. You know how ridiculous that would be? Conversely, compare it to Jane Goodall. What did Jane Goodall do when she wanted to understand how chimpanzees lived, how they actually behaved? She went and lived with them. Was it easy for her to do? No. I'm sure she got a lot of pushback on that. And I've seen a documentary with her from back in the day. Awesome, 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 awesome work. Hell yeah, Jane Goodall. Hell yeah. That's how you find out about how an animal behaves. Humans are no different. You want to find out how humans respond to a belief in realism or anti-realism? You do empirical research. You do observational research. You do cognitive interviewing. You do qualitative research. You do studies. You do lab studies. You do online surveys. There are a wealth of methods that you could use to actually study how people actually respond to actually believing or disbelieving in some metaethical position. You cannot figure it out by armchair reasoning. It's not an armchair question. Jesus. Oh, okay. So Ray Slimagir says, my question is why the empirical question matters. Well, the empirical question matters for answering the empirical question. So are most people realists? Here, Christian is talking about the psychological, behavioral consequences of people being anti-realists. So asking why does the empirical data matter doesn't make sense. For comparison, if someone was saying, talking about this or that cause of cancer, imagine someone was saying tea causes, like green tea causes cancer. Wouldn't it matter what the empirical data showed that was true? As far as I know, that's not true. That's bullshit, right? So the empirical data matters. So if someone says most people are reacting this way, or this is a consequence of people being anti-realists, it matters whether you actually have data to support that, because that's not an a priori question. It's not a question about the relation between concepts. It's not a question about abstract philosophical truths. It's a question about human behavior, human psychology, how people respond to these sorts of things. Of course, empirical data matters to an empirical question. So you say, like any attempt at using people think X to justify the truth of moral realism would just be a fallacious appeal to majority opinion. It wouldn't. So take the classic methods that are used in analytic metaethics. They start with a semantic thesis about what ordinary moral claims are in the business of doing. And so to the extent that that is itself an empirical question, it fixes the referent of what it is we're even talking about. So for instance, do unicorns exist? Well, that question turns on what's meant by unicorn. And if what you're trying to do is base your meaning of what a unicorn refers to on the ordinary use of the term, and to the extent that you view ordinary meaning as an empirical question, you would need to do empirical to find out what people mean when they refer to unicorns. And let's say it turns out when people are talking about unicorns, they're talking about a rhinoceros. Well, rhinos exist. So you show people pictures of a rhino and say, what is this? And they go, unicorn. Okay, unicorns exist. And let's say it's 97% of people. Or instead, you survey people, and let's say you do this in all 7,000 languages somehow. You somehow manage to do this. And in all 7,000 languages, you show them mystical horses with horns that are glowing or whatever, and they all point to that, 100% of them, and none of them point to rhinos. Okay, now they're referring to something that doesn't exist. So how people use terms is relevant to fixing what it is they're referring to. And then once you know that, now you could discover whether that thing exists or not. So there's two separate questions. There's the linguistic question, which thing are we pointing to? And then there's a separate question, does that thing exist? And so we need to fix both before we could talk about whether the term is successfully referring. We need to know what it's referring to. And so we need to know how people are using it. That's why the empirical stuff is relevant. All right.
We get from doing the quote unquote.
Let's start the whole thing over again.
If objective morality is not true, then a lot of the social fabric will slowly start to fall apart.
Notice a problem too. He says if objective morality is not true, why does it matter whether objective morality is true or not? First of all, like whether objective morality is true is already weird. But whether or not there is objective morality is a separate question from whether people believe in objective morality. Wouldn't it be the belief in objective morality that matters, not whether or not there in fact is objective morality?
And arguably already has started to. See, one of the things that people who deny objective morality say is, oh, it's actually not a big deal because we have plenty of reasons to be moral anyways in our own ways, and that's totally fine. And these people are usually what's called Humeans, which means that the only reason you ever have to do something is if you want to. And a lot of us want to do what we would normally call moral things, so we'll be fine in the end. But this just completely misunderstands the situation.
How would anybody do anything morally if they didn't want to do it? How would they do it? Because let's say, I'm kind of tempted to lie, but lying is wrong, so I won't lie. Aren't you following that rule because you want to? Like, isn't that what voluntary action is? How do realists get around this?
Take the famous thought experiment by Peter Singer, for instance. He says that if you saw a drowning child and you had to ruin your nice pair of shoes to save him, you would probably do it and you would feel like you should do it. Similarly, you can, for a very similar amount of money, save a child in Africa right now. So if you're going to be consistent, you should donate now. The problem is, if we're humans and if we think the only thing that gives us a reason to do anything is if we want to, realistically, most of us don't actually want to donate a lot of money. Satisfaction.
Okay, so it's already the case that most of us don't donate a lot of money. What is he trying to show here? Do realists donate money at higher rates than anti-realists? And is this caused by them being realist? If you convince a person to be a realist, are they more likely to donate to charity? If so, why would they be more likely to donate to charity? Like, this is kind of silly. And I'm trying to find data. If somebody wants to look this up, that would really help me. Let me see. I want survey data on the metaethical views of effective altruists. Let's somebody try to find that. I did a search for it, and we'll see what we get with that.
We get from doing the quote unquote right thing is just not that much more pleasurable than like living a life of luxury. So if morality,
yeah, so notice how he slipped in pleasurable there. So doing what you want doesn't necessarily mean doing what's pleasurable. Let's take that back so you can catch that.
It's just not that much more pleasurable than like to donate a lot of money. The satisfaction we get from doing the quote unquote right thing is just not that much more pleasurable than like
slipped it in there. Almost didn't notice that. So Christian here is conflating two things. The Humean thinks that we have reasons to do what we want, but what we want includes all of our values. So this could include altruistic sentiments, moral convictions, those sorts of things. It is not hedonism. And so, Christian, shame on you. You have mixed up humanism with hedonism. Shame, shame, shame. Big mistake.
Living a life of luxury. So if morality ultimately...
That's a very straightforward mistake. Christian has simply and straightforwardly conflated a Humean view of motivation with hedonism, and he slipped it in there by implying that Humeans only do things because they're pleasurable. And so if people were Humean anti-realists, they would only be motivated to do things that are pleasurable, and so they wouldn't want to donate to charity. Nonsense. Not true at all.
It just comes down to whatever we want to do, man. Then so many of the things that we would consider moral, all the sacrifices that morality seems to require of us for the good of everyone else, for the good of cooperation, for the good of cohesion, gets thrown out the wayside because in practice, most of us don't actually want to sacrifice. That's just human nature. So this idea of if objective morality doesn't exist, we'll be fine anyways is complete bullshit because we are, while not 100% selfish, pretty damn selfish. And as this gospel of moral relativism continues to spread, you can expect a lot of the cohesion that comes from people feeling morally inclined is also going to go away. Arguably already has. Just ask yourself, do you think society has gotten more or less high trust compared to your parents or your grandparents' generation? What do you expect to happen when there's not one unit?
He's presented no evidence that people were realists in the past and they're less inclined towards realism now. It's just speculative, totally unsubstantiated claims.
Unifying thread binding all of our actions together, and that every man, woman, and child has their own North Star. What do you think happens next? Now, these arguments are based on Michael Huemer's ethical intuitionism. I'm going to be pressing Michael on these exact issues in a couple weeks on my podcast. You can subscribe to my YouTube to be alerted when this goes live. Also, follow.
Yeah, not very compelling at all. All right. I want to see that data if anybody has it. Did anybody find it? There's a poll here somewhere. Somebody in the chat. There's like 50 of 40, 50 of you. Somebody look it up. All right. Yikes. Yeah, I'm getting stuff on them being utilitarians. I don't care about that. Ugh. Ah, here it is. Found it. Okay. So here's a poll, debate morality is objective, and this is on the Effective Altruism Forum, 312 votes. Yeah, I don't know. It's I don't know what to make of that. Does this just give the raw numbers? It looks pretty even. Maybe more people agree than disagree. I don't know. That's not very helpful. But yeah, what you're not seeing here is that effective altruists like unambiguously lean towards realism. So yeah. Why doesn't it give the actual numbers? It's annoying. Yeah, so that's about the best I could do. There's just not, I don't see any particular indication that realism is especially prominent among effective altruists. So yeah. Yeah, I agree. Hiroyuki Tanada says, it always sounds like people value those moral standards subjectively anyway. Otherwise, why be sad if they change? I agree. Yeah, I don't know how realists think they're going to do anything unless it's mediated through their motivation or their subjective value of the objective values. I don't know how they think motivation works. All right. That was objectivity part 3. Let's see if we got more here. I know there's more. Arguments for objective morality. Oh, it stopped sharing. Whoopsie. Let's keep going. One moment. Yes, about the best I could do is found a survey where it's about equal. All right, next video.
Subjective, man. It's all just like your opinion. Morality's all subjective, man. It's all just like your opinion. You have no idea what you're talking about. This is going to be the series going into the actual argument behind why objective morality is real. It's going to be a long one. It's going to require some attention span, but you're smart and you can keep up. The way that this argument's going to work is we're going to go through all 5 possible explanations for what morality is. You're probably thinking of one of them. And if I can show you that arguments 1, 2, 3, and 4 fail, we are forced to conclude that the 5th option, objective morality, is true. All of this is based on Michael Huemer's ethical intuitionism, because I'm going to talk to the guy in a month on my podcast. So get ready for the argument. In this part, we're going to be tearing apart.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to become increasingly clear. A lot of Christian's content is extremely derivative, and it's just parroting Huemer, which is unfortunate. I really hope nobody goes around parroting me. Form your own ideas. So the first claim, and this is something that comes from Huemer, and I very much disagree with Huemer about this, and I really want to talk to him some more about this. So according to Huemer, these are the only 5 logically possible positions in metaethics, which is non-cognitivism, subjectivism, naturalism, nihilism, and objectivism. He might use slightly different terminology. This is false. I don't endorse any of these views. I endorse a 6th view, which is not one of these views. Unless someone could show that my position is logically impossible, this is false. And no one has shown that my view is logically impossible. Now, why do I endorse a view that doesn't fit one of these? Well, here's why. Contemporary analytic metaethics is based on a methodology that was developed and employed throughout the 20th century. Raistlin asks a good question about why is this empirical stuff relevant? Well, it's not directly and necessarily relevant to the question of whether there are stance-independent moral facts or not. There's a good paper by Kahan called Must Moral Realism Make a Semantic Claim? Kahan argues, no, it doesn't require a semantic claim. But for whatever reason, 20th century metaethics began with questions about what is the meaning of sort of first order moral claims, the claims like stealing is wrong, lying is wrong, that sort of thing. And what they did is they wanted to take those claims and say, well, what do people mean when they make those claims? And then we're going to use that as the springboard towards figuring out the metaphysical questions about whether there's objective morality or not. And all 5 of these positions take positions on the meaning of ordinary moral claims. The non-cognitivist one says moral claims are non-propositional. So they only express non-propositional content like imperatives or emotions. The subjectivist one says ordinary moral claims, when people make moral claims, they're implicitly indexing their standards or the standards of their culture. The naturalist realist, he just puts naturalism on there, says that moral claims do purport to describe stance-independent moral facts, and those facts are consistent with the natural sciences. Error theory says people, they speak just like realists. So the last three of these all have the same description of how people speak. So the last three have the same account. So one account says people are not making propositional claims. One says they are making propositional claims, but the truth of those claims is indexed to the standards of individuals or groups. And the third group, naturalism, nihilism, and objectivism, say when people make moral claims, they're trying to describe objective moral facts. The three positions differ on what they think about those. So the naturalist says there are these objective moral facts, and those facts are natural facts. The error theorist says there are no objective moral facts, so all of those people's claims, they're all trying to refer to something that doesn't exist. Kind of like if everybody's running around saying, God wants me to do this, God wants me to do that. If God doesn't exist, those claims are false because God doesn't want anything. And then the last one is objectivism. I don't know why he calls it that, because naturalists are objectivists too, is the non-naturalist position. Humer calls it ethical intuitionism. And this holds that there are moral facts, they are stance independent, and they're not consistent with the natural sciences. They're non-natural. So those are the five positions. Now, there's only three accounts of like ordinary moral semantics, that it's non-propositional, that it's propositional but indexed, or it's propositional and non-indexed. Now, here's the issue. I don't endorse any of those views because there's an issue with how that question is approached. If it's intended to be an a priori question, then I reject it because I don't think that the meaning of ordinary moral claims is an a priori question. I think it's an empirical question. So if philosophers approaching the semantics of ordinary moral language do not take it to be an empirical question, then I cannot endorse any of the positions because I don't endorse the answer to the meaning of moral claims being an a priori question. If instead they take it to be a posteriori, if they take it to be an empirical question that we figure out by doing empirical research, well, that's what I did in my dissertation. I did empirical research, and the conclusion I reached is the answer is none of the above. Ordinary moral claims are not determinately committed to being propositional or non-propositional or purporting to describe stance-independent moral truths or not. They're indeterminate. I defend a view called folk metaethical indeterminacy. This view was heavily influenced by the work of Michael Gill, who wrote a paper called Indeterminacy and Variability in Metaethics. It was back in 2009, I think, when that paper was published. It's also similar to a view from Don Loeb called moral incoherentism. Loeb argues that we are simultaneously committed to conflicting semantic theses, and so our ordinary moral accounts are incoherent. They're internally contradictory and nonsensical. I don't endorse that view, but it's similar to mine, and Don Loeb is a friend of mine, and he does good work on this stuff too. And he considers these to be empirical questions. And so you have that sort of Necker-Cubian issue with the ordinary moral discourse. If it's intended to be approached in an a priori manner, I reject it on those grounds, so I can't endorse any positions that require the truth about moral claims to be approached from an a priori method. If instead it's an empirical approach, then I think all of the theories are false on empirical grounds. So I can't endorse any of these positions. So what do I endorse? Well, I deny that they are stance-independent moral truths, but I also don't endorse any particular semantic thesis. Because all five of these positions rely on a semantic thesis, and I reject all of the semantic theses, I have an anti-realist position that doesn't fall within the scope of this framing. So the Humer could at best only say that these are the only five logically possible positions conditional on certain background assumptions being true, namely being the methodological assumptions or the empirical assumptions behind this five-fold framing being true. I think if there are, basically it's conditional, one or the other. It's damned if they do, damned if they don't. If the considerations are non-empirical, I reject them. I'm an empiricist. If they're empirical, I think they're all false. So these better not be the only logically possible positions, because then we would be left with positions that are all false. So that would be a problem. All positions are false. So these positions are they're not exhaustive. They're not jointly exhaustive of the full range of potential positions that you could hold, because they're only downstream of certain assumptions, and I reject those assumptions. Neither Humer nor anyone else, to my knowledge, has shown that it's logically impossible to reject those assumptions. So the claim that these are the only logically possible positions, as far as I could tell, is false. And it's rather straightforwardly false. And I don't know why Humer keeps saying this, because this is not true, that these are the only five positions. Emerson Green made a similar remark some years ago, and I gave him pushback. He didn't seem to like that very much. I don't know why people are just so gung-ho about this and so committed to this. People that, if you're fans of Humer, I'd like to see you press him on this, why he's so convinced these are the only five positions. I'd like to know what he thinks of my alternative position or Don Loeb's. So you have at least three alternative positions you could take about language, which is indeterminacy, pluralism with incoherentism, and pluralism without incoherentism. So there's at least three.
And if I can show you that arguments 1, 2, 3, and 4 fail, we are forced to conclude that the fifth option, objective morality, is true. All of this.
Yeah, Bardo asked a good question. Why is naturalism distinct from objectivism? That's because Christian is using sloppy terminology here. He should have had non-naturalist realism and naturalist realism there. So shame on him for sloppy terminology.
Is based on Michael Huemer's ethical intuitionism, because I'm going to talk to the guy in a month on my podcast. So get ready.
Just to flag another thing.
Of one of
Subjectivism here, in the book, Huemer is careful to distinguish subjectivism from the others. He's not just referring to relativism. He's referring to like all the like sort of a stance-dependent positions. And so I would say that a better way of framing the 5 positions would be non-cognitivism, stance-dependent cognitivism, and stance-independent cognitivism. And then stance-independent cognitivist realism and stance-independent cognitivist anti-realism, which would be error theory. So then you'd have like 4 on there. And then I don't really see a point in mentioning the naturalist, non-naturalist distinction for the purposes of being a realist or not, because that's just a separate issue. So I would present 4: non-cognitivism, stance-dependent cognitivism, stance-independent cognitivist realism, and stance-independent cognitivist anti-realism. Those would be the 4. And that would be a more accurate and clear way of framing the traditional positions would fall into one of those 4 categories. And they would, in fact, all fall into one of those 4 categories. I think those are jointly exhaustive. But this framing is a little sloppy. The naturalist, non-naturalist thing isn't really necessary. Yeah.
And if I can show you that arguments 1, 2, 3, and 4 fail, we are forced to conclude that the fifth option, objective morality, is true. All of this is based.
Yeah. So see, this is why Huemer does this, because he could do this process of elimination approach where he could critique the traditional anti-realist views and then argue that realism wins by default. And then he doesn't have to present a direct argument for realism. Not that Huemer shies away from doing so. Huemer has actually pioneered novel arguments for moral realism, but this is one style of argument, which is process of elimination. So if you say these are the only 5 possibilities and these 4 are wrong, this one's got to be right, that's actually true. And so one way of responding to this wouldn't be to defend these one of these 4. It'd be to argue these aren't the only 5 possibilities. And that's the approach I take.
On Michael Huemer's ethical intuitionism, because I'm going to talk to the guy in a month on my podcast. So get ready for the argument. In this part, we're going to be tearing apart the first interpretation of morality, which is called non-cognitivism, which is a very fancy way of saying moral statements can't be true or false. They're either A, an expression of your emotion, or B, a simple command. Now, an expression of your emotion can't be true or false. If you say murder is wrong, really just means.
Somebody said this. I think Christian blocked you in Substack because you created some long hostile perceived the way comment and then deleted it before he was able to respond. I don't know if I did that or not. I don't remember. Maybe I did. Yeah, he didn't. I don't remember if he explained why he blocked me. I remember I posted something on it. Let me go look it up. It was some time ago. Yeah, I don't have much on that. So I don't know. Do you remember what I was talking about? Do you remember if I said something and then deleted it? I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know who you are, user or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I do see myself commenting here. Let's see, 1 second. I'm curious what it was about. I just don't remember. And when was this? This was back in May. Oh, this was only a couple months ago, and I already can't remember. It's funny. 1 second. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Sorry, I'm just looking up the original conversation. Yeah, it's not here. So if I did say something, I apparently deleted it. Or maybe somebody else could, maybe he deleted it. I don't know. I don't think so. Take your word for it. Yeah, I may have said something a little bit hostile. Oh, okay. Or at least something that was perceived as hostile. I mean, I acknowledge that I'm kind of annoyed with Christian, but I don't feel any particular animosity towards him. Anyway, okay. So
Boo murder, there's nothing true or false about that. You're not saying, I don't like murder. That's a statement that could be true or false. You're simply saying boo murder. Alternatively, if you think murder is wrong really just means don't murder, which is a command, that also can't be true or false. Commands can't be true or false. This is the first theory, non-cognitivism. Now, why is it wrong? Well, it's wrong because this is a theory about language. If I can show you guys that the way we actually speak about morality implies that we're talking about some truth of the matter, then non-cognitivism is false. Let me give you a few examples. The way that I'm going to argue against non-cognitivism is to show you that normal statements about moral topics don't translate well into this like emotivist or this like prescriptivist way of thinking. Ready? It is false that abortion is wrong. Okay, that's a normal statement we understand. If we're emotivists, that translates into it is false that boo abortion.
oh, this is rough. Why would an emotivist try to translate their statements in that way? So it is false that boo abortion. I mean, this is just trying to jam the first order ordinary moral claims would be used in a context where a person would be saying something like stealing is wrong, and that judgment would express an attitude, an emotion, or an imperative. Now, you could always create an artificial circumstance where the structure of the language makes that primary function of the language, which is expressive, an awkward fit that's trivially easy to do. I've given examples of people issuing imperatives in particular contexts. This is the one I like to give. Teenager parents told, hey, you can't go to that party. It'll get too rowdy. We don't want you going. So the kid tries to sneak out and they think the parents are sitting in the dark downstairs, kid walking down the stairs. They flip on the lights and say, we got you. You will not go to that party. Or do not go. Sorry. Yeah, you will not go to that party. Well, notice you will not go to that party is a declarative sentence, is a statement. Now, are they making an assertion about what's true or false? No, they're issuing a command. And so the imperative is actually expressed in the form of a declarative sentence. So the way that that's functioning is that it's borrowing the force of like, we're making a statement about what will occur in the future, because that is the force of issuing a command. The command is so strong. Like it'd be like someone saying that they're going to defy, like Gandalf, you shall not pass. A declaration of what is or will be the case can be used expressively. And the question is, when people make moral judgments, make moral claims, are they typically primarily, and like is the primary function of them to express emotions or to issue imperatives? The fact that a person can step back and theorize would not undermine that fact. So I don't know that this is a particularly effective critique at all. Nothing about the use of the language being used in that imperatival context or that emotional expressive context requires that it retain that meaning outside that context. So if somebody then said, okay, it's false that murder is wrong, you should just translate that differently. What Christian is saying relies on the assumption of a rigidity to the meaning of moral claims where, part of this is relying on, for instance, here's one way of construing it, not necessarily the only way. One way of thinking about this is that murder is wrong on a non-cognitive view. It has this like rigid semantics where murder is wrong directly translates to something like murder boo. But what could be going on instead is that the statement is understood, it functions pragmatically to express a person's emotions. In the same way that you will not go to that party, semantically speaking, you could say it's propositional or declarative or something like that. But what is it functioning to do pragmatically in that context? What is the pragmatics of it? The purpose of the statement in that context is to issue a command. And so as long as things are carried by the context, then if you change the context, you change the meaning. If you strip that sentence, you will not go to that party, in some other context. Imagine someone's like, hey, is Linda going to go to the party? She's not going to go to that party. Is that an expression of an emotion? No, it's making a prediction about the future. And now that is propositional. And so when you change the context, as long as we're understanding language to have this highly context-dependent way of conveying meaning, the expressivist or the non-cognitivist could say, look, in the context of an ordinary first-order moral proposition being uttered in some context, the typical use of it is to express an emotion. This does not mean that I have to rigidly take a direct translation of that and transpose that over to any other context where you'd have the same string of words. So if you then say it is false that murder is wrong, that could be reconstrued by a non-cognitivist as something like it would be an inappropriate attitude to have towards that, or I would disapprove of that, of having that attitude or something like that. So they could understand or modify the context. They could basically address what things could mean in different contexts in a way that's emotivism consistent without having to have this like rigid semantics. So a lot of this would be predicated on construing non-cognitivism in these like really rigid, fixed semanticist ways, which are themselves rooted in conceptions of language that an emotivist is not obligated to accept. If they are, they're going to have problems. And some of them try to operate within that sort of a semantic straitjacket around those problems. And I don't think they're particularly successful, but they're not required to do so. And so if you adopt an alternative conception of language that isn't quite as rigid as that, and is more pragmatics driven, more improvisational, something like the view of language proposed in The Language Game by Christensen and Chater, then you're going to get a very different picture of what resources are available to emotivists to address these sorts of objections. So I think these sorts of objections hold against any conception of emotivism or non-cognitivism more generally that is conjoined with rigid semanticist views of the way that language works that are insensitive to context and pragmatics. But the moment you start bringing those in, this limbers up language and the way language works in a way that allows it to, rather not in a way that's forced or strained, to just not be subject to these sorts of concerns. So I think these concerns are quite weak. I think they're rooted in outdated conceptions of language that are very likely false on independent grounds. And emotivists shouldn't be too troubled by these sorts of concerns. If they're traditional analytic emotivists, well, their problem is being traditional analytic, not being emotivist. And that would be true of any metaethicist on any position of the matter. There's a reason I reject all of the traditional analytic positions. I also reject error theory. I also reject the subjectivist positions. I also reject the naturalist realist positions. They're all swimming in presuppositions about language and meaning that are misguided and wrong. And so, of course, you're going to be able to take the emotivism and these weird views about language and meaning and find some problems there. And maybe realism is a better fit for those assumptions about language. But maybe the problem is the assumptions about language, not emotivism. At least that's what I think. All right. User mentioned this, something about Reddit. Okay. Do you think you'd be able to locate that and send it to me? Because I'd be curious what he said about the matter. It's possible that I offended or upset him in a way that was unintentional. It's possible it was intentional too. I don't know. Maybe I got really pissed off and forgot about it. I'm pretty forgetful. So yeah, if you do have more info on that, I would like to follow up on that because I don't know. I don't actually remember what Christian's problem with me is. I don't know what it is. But he certainly seems to continue to have a problem. In fact, let me show you some. Oh, wait, I can't show you that because that'll. Yeah. Yeah, that would give it away. That's not good. Okay. Let me move that out of the way. Okay, let's continue this.
That doesn't make sense. If we're prescriptivists, so we think it's just about prescriptions, then that statement turns into, it is false that don't have abortions. That doesn't make sense. Here's another example. I hope abortion isn't wrong. Makes perfect sense. But if we interpret this like the emotivists want, that translates into, I hope not boo abortion. That makes no sense. If we're prescriptivists, that turns into, I hope not don't have an abortion. These are nonsense statements. So the thing,
yeah, I mean, this is ridiculous, and there's no contemporary expressivist that would even bat an eye at handling this. Maybe I'll have somebody on the channel to talk about why these are such bad objections. But yeah, they just don't have a problem with this.
Non-cognitivism, which has these two branches of emotivism and prescriptivism.
Virtually nobody these days is a prescriptivist or an emotivist. There's a few on Substack. I don't know of anybody else that is. I don't know how exactly they would handle this stuff, but I doubt many of them wouldn't incorporate at least some features of conceptions of language that are going to be able to handle this. But within academic philosophy, pretty much everybody's some type of expressivist. They're going to be quasi-realists and that sort of thing. I don't know if there's a single person I've ever heard of since 1990 that endorses emotivism or prescriptivism within academic philosophy. So I don't know why this is even being discussed. Yeah, I know Alex O'Connor is an emotivist, but I don't actually know what his views are. And I mean, it'd be a little weird to make a whole video about why emotivism is wrong. And then its only prominent representative is Alex O'Connor. Okay, so Alex O'Connor's wrong. Sure. Like what? Okay, and now what? Now what about contemporary expressivism? What about all those views? Because he's not even addressing those. Bardo asks, what do you think is mistaken about error theory, Lance? It shares with realists the presumption that ordinary moral language is committed to realism, and I think that's false. Very easy, right?
Don't actually translate English properly. So because they're theories about how we actually speak, when we translate these normal sentences into the ways that the emotivists or the prescriptivists want us to understand moral language, it all of a sudden turns into gibberish. So this, as a theory about our own language, is false. We do, as a matter of fact, speak as if moral statements could be true or wrong. When we debate, is abortion right or wrong, we're not just saying, yay, abortion, boo, abortion. We're saying, no, you're wrong about something, and here's an argument why. We act as if there's a truth matter. So non-cognitivism does not capture how we actually speak about morality and is therefore a false theory. That's 1 out of 5 down. And in part 2, we're going to be tearing apart moral relativism, so buckle up. Morality's all subjective, man. It's all just like your opinion. You have
One moment. Sorry, guys. I got to take care of something real quick. Oh, I could take care of it on here. 1 second. What the heck? Where is that? Yeah, okay. Okay. Sorry, just had to settle a matter. I hate when I have to do that in the middle of a live, but things happen. All right. Let's do one more video. I should have just ended the stuff there, but now I feel weird about just closing it out after a weird pause. All right, that was objective part 3. No, that was okay. Against subjectivism. Do I really want to do another one of these? I'm not sure that I do. All right, let's call it quits there. I think I'm done with that. Let's see, how many more videos do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh my God. Yeah, okay, we're gonna have to do a whole other stream on these. 9, 10. Okay, there's a bunch more videos for me to do, but 2 hours and 15 minutes is enough already. Yeah, Trevor Phillips, that's a good. I wonder if he thinks mathematicians act like Platonists talking about mathematics. Yeah, what would that look like? In fact, that original paper by Gill, he actually gives that Platonism as a kind of example of a reductio. Imagine going around saying ordinary people presuppose mathematical Platonism when they like are paying their taxes or adding up the tip at a restaurant. He just says it's not part of ordinary thought to be a Platonist or an anti-Platonist. It's not what ordinary mathematical discourse is about. I think the same thing about moral language, and I think Gill suggests this possibility too, is it's just not in the business of taking a stance on realism or anti-realism. It's just not what it's for. And so you don't need to endorse one of those positions as an ordinary person, implicitly or otherwise. People don't act like realists because acting like a realist, acting like an anti-realist, you act the same damn way. So, yeah. Realists just don't have a good case that people act like realists. They typically make assumptions about how anti-realists would behave differently that are highly contentious based on highly strained presumptions about specific forms of anti-realism. But nothing about my anti-realist position requires me to act in a way any differently from realists other than that honest and sincere commitment to anti-realism requires me to say I'm an anti-realist, not a realist. So like I speak differently about metaethics, but in terms of like everyday practical stuff, I act exactly like a realist. Devos, any guests coming on soon? I don't have any lined up. I've been trying to reach out to Ian, allegedly Ian, and haven't heard back yet. If you know, like maybe messages on Discord are not the best way. I don't know how to get in touch with Ian. Matt Delahunty, I'd like to contact too, but I didn't immediately find contact info. I don't know. Somebody help me out here. How do I get in touch with Matt? So I'm trying to get them to have a conversation with me, but I don't know if either of them is willing to do so. They have pretty big channels. They might not want to. And I messaged quite a few guests. Some want to wait. Some it's going to be a while. So, nah. So, but yeah, I have a lot more going on in the summer than I expected. I was hoping the house would be ready already and we would be moved in there. Things have not gone as smooth as I would have liked. Do they ever go smoothly? So, and then I really needed a break. And then I was home with my daughter for a week. So lots of stuff going on. Oh, right. Yeah, I think that's it for me. I'm going to need a break. Jevo says, first, Matt, you should just call in on a show while he's live and ask if he come on and chat about more realism. Do you think it's appropriate to put him on the spot there? That doesn't seem right. Well, is that a problem? I don't know if that would be inappropriate or not. I was hoping I could just email him, but I didn't immediately find an email. Anyway, Christian, if I pissed you off, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to. Ian is live right now. God isn't real, come debate. So, yeah, see, so Grant Miller, they normally have specific topics, so they might not like that. Right. So if Ian is on there to talk about God's existence, why would I go on there and say, hey, debate me on realism? Pavlovian exercise. Ooh, I like the name. Hello, Lance. I just wanted to hop in and say hi. I've been watching a slew of your content and find a lot of the content thought-provoking. Great. You should get Brian B. I'm assuming it's not Brian. Who's that? Brian Besson. Who is that? Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. Put more work into it. I put like 5 minutes into it. I didn't find any immediate obvious way to get in touch with them. So no, just I want there to just be an email or a web page to go to. Maybe there is. All right, everybody. I'm going to call it quits there. There's too many other videos to review, and I can't possibly do them all now. I'm getting worn out here. You know what? I'm not worn out. I don't want to do it anymore. All right. So do please like the video. Thank you for everybody that threw money my way. Is Nitty and Matt, I think it was. Really appreciate it. Quietism about whether God exists. I don't even know if I endorse that position. Appreciate it though, Saphir. All right, everybody, going to close it out there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you go comment on Christian stuff, do be kind, be polite, be more polite than I apparently was. So don't go over there, be a rude jerk. We don't need that, especially from me. You know, I could say practice what you preach. I don't necessarily do so, but that's okay. You know, sometimes advice from a drug addict, don't do drugs, is often better than advice from somebody that's not. So advice from somebody that often gets angry about stuff. Hey, you know what? It's not good. It's something I'd rather not do. I'd rather be really chill. So if you do comment on their stuff, or if you go check out the Matt and Ian video, be nice to them too. Just don't be assholes to people on the internet. There's no need for it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you leave a good comment, I might pin it.